Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Augustus Millfield, but everyone calls me Gus. I've been a park ranger here in Shenandoah for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, you name it. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was August 1969, and the heat was killing us. We hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks, and the whole park felt like it was holding its breath. The trees looked sick, their leaves curling up brown at the edges. Even the streams were running low, showing rocks that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. I was working alone that week, doing geological surveys up on Old Rag Mountain. My job was to map out the cave systems that the drought had uncovered. When water levels drop this low, you find openings you never knew existed. Some of them lead to caves bigger than churches. People think being a ranger is all about saving lost campers and fighting forest fires. But I'm the science guy. I studied forestry at Virginia Tech, then spent 2 years in Korea as an Army chaplain before I came here. These days, I don't talk about the chaplain part. Let's just say I saw some things over there that changed my mind about God and leave it at that. I was checking my equipment that morning. Rope, flashlights, the new camera they'd given me to document the cave systems, when I heard a truck coming up the fire road. That was strange. Nobody was supposed to be up here except me. The truck stopped and Sheriff Hayes climbed out, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Behind him came Dr. Sarah Martinez from the county coroner's office. She was carrying her black bag, which meant only one thing. "Morning, Gus," Hayes said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Dead girl in White Oak Canyon. College student. Her name's Jennifer Walsh, 19 years old, studying geology at UVA. He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Thing is, Gus, she's not just dead. Well, you better come see for yourself." Dr. Martinez stepped forward. She was a tough woman, had to be in her line of work, but she looked shaken. "The body is 200 feet underground, Gus, in a cave system. She's been positioned. Positioned? Impaled on a rock formation, a stalagmite. But here's the thing, there's no way she could have fallen onto it. The cave entrance is a narrow crawl space. You have to belly crawl for 50 feet before it opens up. Then there's a steep climb down using ropes. Professional climbing gear." Hayes nodded grimly. "Her equipment is all there, neat as you please. Ropes are good, anchors are solid. But one rope has been cut, clean cut, like with a knife." I felt something cold move in my stomach. "Any idea how long she's been down there?" 3 days, maybe 4, Dr. Martinez said. "But Gus, that's not the worst part. When I went down to examine the body, I found things carved into the rocks around her. Symbols, old ones. And there were bones down there, lots of bones. Some of them looked really old." The heat seemed to press down harder. I could hear insects buzzing in the dead air, but no birds. Now that I thought about it, I hadn't heard any birds all morning. "You know these caves better than anyone," Hayes said. "We need you to help us figure out what happened down there." I wanted to say no. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, like the air before a bad storm. But Jennifer Walsh was somebody's daughter. She deserved answers. "All right," I said. "Let me get my gear." As I loaded my pack, I noticed something else strange. My grandmother's rosary, which I kept in my shirt pocket more out of habit than faith, felt warm against my chest. I'd carried it through Korea, through all those nights when I stopped believing in the God it represented, but I kept it a Niway. Maybe for luck, or maybe because letting go of it would mean admitting that all those years of seminary before the war had been wasted. The rosary had never felt warm before. Dr. Martinez was studying a map when I came back. "The cave entrance is here," she said, pointing to a spot marked White Oak Falls. But according to this, there shouldn't be any major cave systems in this area. The geology is all wrong. Maps can be wrong, I said, especially when drought exposes new openings. But you're right about the geology. This is mostly granite and schist. You don't usually get big caves in this type of rock. Hayes looked between us. So what are you saying? I'm saying we need to go down there and see for ourselves. The drive to White Oak Canyon took 20 minutes on the winding fire roads. Nobody talked much. The heat made everything shimmer like a mirage, and the silence in the forest was getting to all of us. When we reached the canyon, I could see the cave entrance Dr. Martinez had mentioned. It was about 4 feet up the rock wall, a dark hole maybe 2 feet wide. Fresh scratches on the rock showed where someone had used climbing gear to reach it. Jennifer's car is down the road about a quarter mile, Hayes said. Parked neat as you please. Her camping gear is still in it, along with her research notes. What was she researching? I asked. Dr. Martinez pulled out a notebook. Underground water systems. She was mapping how the drought was affecting groundwater flow. According to this, she thought she'd found evidence of a major underground river system that wasn't on any of the official surveys. I studied the cave entrance. Something about it bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to move even though there wasn't any wind. Or maybe it was the smell, a faint odor of sulfur that didn't belong in granite caves. We'll need lights and safety ropes, I said. And Dr. Martinez, I'd prefer if you stayed up here until we know what we're dealing with. She shook her head. That's my crime scene. Down there, Gus. I'm going. Hayes checked his service pistol, even though we all knew a gun wouldn't help much if the cave decided to collapse on us. Let's get this over with. As we prepared our gear, I noticed something else strange. My watch had stopped. So had Hayes's. Dr. Martinez's was still running, but the hands were moving backward. The rosary in my pocket was getting warmer. The crawl space was worse than Dr. Martinez had described. For 50 feet, we had to pull ourselves along on our bellies, breathing stale air that tasted like old pennies. Our flashlights carved weak tunnels through the darkness ahead. Jesus, Hayes muttered behind me. His voice was muffled and shaky. How did that girl do this by herself? Same way we're doing it, I said. But I was wondering the same thing. The rock walls pressed in from all sides, and more than once I had to fight down panic when my shoulders got stuck. This wasn't a natural cave formation. The walls were too smooth, too regular. It looked almost like a tunnel. After what felt like hours, the passage opened up. I pulled myself out into a chamber about the size of a school gymnasium. Our lights barely reached the ceiling, which disappeared into blackness somewhere above us. Dr. Martinez came out next, then Hayes. We all stood there for a moment, breathing hard and looking around. My God, Dr. Martinez whispered. The chamber was covered in carvings. Every surface, walls, ceiling, floor, was decorated with symbols and pictures cut deep into the rock. Some looked like animals, but wrong somehow. Others looked like people, but with horns and extra limbs. And there were symbols that hurt to look at, geometric patterns that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. How old do you think these are? Hayes asked. I ran my hand over one of the carvings. The rock was cold, much colder than it should have been. This deep underground in August. Some of these looked like Native American petroglyphs, but others... I traced a symbol that looked familiar, though I couldn't place it. Others looked like something else entirely. Dr. Martinez was photographing everything with her camera, but the flash wasn't working right. The pictures came out dark and blurry with strange light patterns that hadn't been visible to our eyes. The body's down there, she said, pointing to a narrow ledge that led to another drop-off, about 60 feet down. We rigged safety ropes and began the descent. The air got colder as we went deeper, and the smell of sulfur grew stronger. Hayes was sweating despite the cold, and I could hear his breathing getting fast and shallow. You okay, Sheriff? Yeah, I don't like tight spaces much. The ledge we were following spiraled down around the walls of what seemed to be a natural shaft. But every few feet there were more carvings. And something else. Scratches in the rock that looked fresh. Like claw marks, but bigger than any animal I knew. Gus, Dr. Martinez called from below. You need to see this. I rappelled down to where she was standing on a wide ledge. Her flashlight was pointed at something in the center of the space, and when I saw it, my blood went cold. Jennifer Walsh was there, just like Dr. Martinez had said. But seeing it in person was different. The girl was positioned upright on a stone spike that came up from the floor, arms spread wide like she was being crucified. Her climbing helmet was still on her head, her equipment neatly arranged around the base of the formation. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was her face. She didn't look scared or hurt. She looked peaceful, almost happy, like she had wanted to be there. "How is this possible?" Hayes asked. He'd made it down and was staring at the scene with his mouth open. "It's not," I said. "The spike is 8 feet tall. Even if she climbed up and jumped, the angle is wrong. She'd have had to fall straight down from directly above." Dr. Martinez was examining the body with a professional detachment that I admired. No defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. It's like she just let it happen. I walked around the formation, studying the carvings that covered every inch of the surrounding walls. That's when I saw them, the other skeletons. They were arranged in niches carved into the rock walls, dozens of them. Some were obviously old, nothing but bones and scraps of cloth. But others looked more recent. "Dr. Martinez," I called. "How many missing persons cases has the county had in the last few years?" She came over to look at what I'd found. "Oh my God, there must be 20 bodies here, maybe more." Hayes was checking his radio, but it was just static. "We need to get out of here and call for backup." That's when we heard it. A sound from somewhere deeper in the cave system. A low, rumbling noise that seemed to come from the rock itself. And underneath it, something that sounded almost like breathing. "What was that?" Dr. Martinez whispered. The sound came again, closer this time. And with it, a wind that shouldn't have existed 200 feet underground. The wind carried that sulfur smell, stronger now, and something else. Something that smelled like old meat and wet fur. Our flashlights began to dim, not all at once, but slowly, like the batteries were dying. But I'd put fresh batteries in before we came down. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." But as we turned toward the rope we'd used to descend, we saw something that made my blood freeze. The rope was gone, cut clean through, just like Jennifer's had been. Hayes drew his pistol. "Who's down here with us?" The breathing sound came again, and this time it was definitely coming from somewhere in the chamber with us. Something big, moving in the shadows beyond our failing lights. Dr. Martinez grabbed my arm. "Gus, look at the carvings." I followed her gaze and D-Bud felt my knees go weak. The symbols carved into the walls were glowing, not bright, just a faint phosphorescence that pulsed in rhythm with the breathing sounds. And in that dim glow, I could see something moving in the shadows, something tall and wrong-shaped, with eyes that reflected our light like an animal's. "Lord help us," Hayes whispered. The thing in the shadows made a sound that might have been laughter. The thing stepped into our fading light, and I understood why Jennifer Walsh had looked peaceful. When you see something that impossible, that wrong, your mind just gives up. It stops trying to make sense of what you're looking at. It was tall, 9 feet at least, with legs like a goat but muscled like a man. Its torso was human except for the gray mottled skin that looked like old leather, but the head was the worst part. Almost human, but stretched long with ram's horns curling back from its skull and eyes that glowed red in our flashlight beams. Dr. Martinez made a small, choked sound. Hayes raised his gun with shaking hands. "Don't," the thing said. Its voice was like gravel being poured down a metal chute. "Your weapons cannot harm me here." It spoke English, perfect English, with just a trace of an accent I couldn't place. Somehow that was more terrifying than if it had just roared at us. "What are you?" I managed to ask. "I am old," it said, taking another step closer. The carved symbols on the walls pulsed brighter. "I walked these ridges when your people still cowered in caves across the great water. I was here when the first of the red men bound me to this place with their blood and their dying prayers." Hayes's gun was shaking so bad he couldn't aim. "Stay back." The creature tilted its head, almost curious. You carry the scent of war upon you, Sheriff. Korea, yes? I can smell the fear you carried from those frozen hills. And you, Doctor, so much death you have seen, so much suffering. It clings to you like perfume. It turned those burning eyes on me, and I felt something probe at the edges of my mind like cold fingers. But yeah, Augustus Millfield, you are different. You have learned the old words, spoken the old prayers, yet you do not believe them. How interesting. My grandmother's rosary was burning hot against my chest now. Without thinking, I pulled it out, and the creature actually took a step back. Ah, it said, and its voice held something like amusement. The old symbols, the old faith. But faith requires belief, does it not? And you, who once would have been my enemy, now doubt everything you once held sacred. I stopped believing in God a long time ago, I said. But I stopped believing in the devil, too. Yet here I stand before you. What does that do to your careful rationality, former chaplain? If I am real, what else might be real as well? The chamber suddenly filled with wind that came from nowhere, and our flashlights went out completely. In the darkness, I could hear Dr. Martinez crying and Hayes praying under his breath. The only light came from the glowing symbols on the walls and the creature's burning eyes. Let me show you why they sought me out, the creature said. You're Jennifer, you're others. Let me show you what I offered them. The air around us shimmered, and suddenly we weren't in the cave anymore. We were standing in a bright meadow full of flowers, with a warm sun overhead and a gentle breeze that smelled like home. In the distance, I could see a white church with people walking toward it, people I recognized even though they'd been dead for years. No, I whispered. This isn't real. Reality is what you make it, the creature said. It was still there, but now it looked almost human, handsome even, in an expensive suit with kind eyes. I can give you back everything you lost. Your faith, your certainty, the comfort of knowing that there is meaning in suffering, purpose in pain. I saw myself walking toward that church, wearing my old chaplain's uniform. Inside I knew were all the soldiers I couldn't save in Korea. They were whole again, happy, waiting to thank me for the comfort I'd brought them in their final moments. All you have to do is stay, the creature said gently. Join them. Join her. It gestured toward Jennifer Walsh, who was standing in the church doorway, smiling and beautiful, and very much alive. Dr. Martinez made a sound like a sob. My daughter. Oh God, Maria, is that you? I turned and saw her reaching toward a little girl who stood at the edge of the meadow. A child who had died of leukemia 2 years ago, according to the newspaper story I'd read. Hayes was looking at a woman in a wedding dress. Sarah? Sarah, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have. This isn't real, I said again, but my voice was weaker now. The rosary in my hand was cooling, and the vision was so beautiful, so perfect. What is real? The creature asked. The pain you carry? The guilt that wakes you at night? The emptiness where your faith used to be? Or this, peace, reunion, purpose, restored? I took a step toward the church, then another. It would be so easy to just let go, to stop fighting, to accept the comfort being offered. But something was wrong with the vision. The people weren't quite right. Their smiles were too wide, their eyes too bright. And there was something moving in the shadows between the trees, something that watched with hungry eyes. What's the price? I asked. The creature's human mask slipped for just a moment. Nothing you won't gladly pay. A few years of service. Help me gather others who are lost, who are hurting. Bring them to me so I can offer them the same peace. You want me to be your priest. You were always my priest, Augustus. You just didn't know it. Every doubt you planted in dying men's hearts, every prayer you spoke without believing, it all served me in the end. The vision wavered, and I saw the truth underneath. The meadow was the cave floor, littered with bones. The church was the stone spike where Jennifer had died. And the people walking toward it weren't the ones I'd lost. They were the ones I'd helped the creature kill. No, I said, and closed my fist around the rosary. The vision shattered like glass. We were back in the cave, in darkness, broken only by those pulsing symbols and burning red eyes. Dr. Martinez and Hayes were standing at the edge of the pit, swaying like sleepwalkers. "Doctor! Sheriff! It's not real!" But they couldn't hear me. They were stepping toward the edge, toward a drop that would send them down into darkness, where more of those stone spikes waited. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "You cannot save them, Augustus. You have no faith left to fight me with. You are empty, hollow, a shell of what you once were." It was right. I'd spent so many years running from God that I'd forgotten how to run to him. But as I watched my friends walking toward their deaths, I remembered something else I'd learned in Korea. Sometimes you don't fight because you believe you can win. Sometimes you fight because it's the right thing to do. I raised the rosary and began to pray. Not the old Latin prayers from seminary, but simple words from memory. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The creature hissed and drew back. "You do not believe those words." "No," I said, continuing the prayer. "But I believe in the people who taught them to me. I believe in my grandmother who gave me this rosary. I believe in the soldiers who died holding on to hope when everything else was gone." The symbols on the walls were flickering now, their light unsteady. "Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done." "Stop!" The creature's voice was losing its human qualities, becoming something like the screech of metal on stone. Dr. Martinez blinked and stepped back from the edge. Hayes shook his head like he was waking up from a dream. "On earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread." On him the creature roared and rushed toward me, but the rosary blazed with white light, not the cold phosphorescence of the symbols, but warm light like sunlight through church windows. It stopped just out of reach, claws extended, face twisted with rage. "You cannot banish me, faithless priest. I am bound to this place by blood and ancient words. I cannot be destroyed." "And forgive us our trespasses," I continued, "as we forgive those who trespass against us." The light was spreading, pushing back the darkness. I could see now that we were in an enormous chamber, far bigger than I'd realized. And everywhere, carved into every surface, were symbols. Not just the creature's markings, but others. Christian crosses, Native American spiritual symbols, Jewish stars, Islamic crescents. Every faith that had ever touched these mountains had left its mark here. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The creature began to change, shrinking, becoming less solid. "This is not over, Augustus Millfield. I cannot be destroyed, only bound. And bindings weaken with time. I will wait. I will call to others. And eventually you will come back to me. They always do. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen." The light flared, and the creature screamed, a sound that seemed to come from the mountain itself. The walls shook, rocks fell, and somewhere far above us, I could hear the rumble of shifting stone. When the light faded, the creature was gone. But I could still feel it, deeper in the mountain, waiting. Hayes grabbed my arm. "The whole place is coming down. We need to get out." But our ropes were gone, and the entrance we'd used was 50 feet above us, with no way to climb the smooth walls. "There!" Dr. Martinez pointed to another opening I hadn't noticed before, a narrow passage that seemed to lead upward. We ran for it as the chamber collapsed behind us. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for one person, and it angled steeply upward through solid rock. We climbed in darkness, feeling our way by touch, while the mountain groaned and shifted around us. After what felt like hours, I saw a light ahead. Real light. Daylight. We emerged from a crack in the rocks about halfway up the canyon wall, gasping and bleeding from a dozen cuts. Below us, the area where we'd entered the cave system had collapsed completely. There was nothing left but a pile of broken stone. "Did that really happen?" Dr. Martinez asked. I looked at the rosary in my hand. It was just a string of old beads now, Nothing special about it except the memories it carried. Yeah, I said. It happened. We didn't talk much on the way back to the ranger station. What was there to say? That we'd met the devil in a cave and lived to tell about it? That an old woman's rosary had saved our lives? That the mountains I'd been protecting for 11 years were home to something that shouldn't exist? Hayes filled out his report in careful, neutral language. Cave-in due to drought conditions. Evidence suggests victim fell into sinkhole. Body unrecoverable due to structural collapse. Dr. Martinez signed off on it, listing Jennifer Walsh's death as accidental. But that night, after they'd gone home to their families, I stayed at my cabin and did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I opened my old Bible. The pages were yellow and brittle, filled with notes from seminary and handwriting that looked like it belonged to someone else. But as I read, I began to remember things I'd tried to forget. Not just the theological arguments and scriptural analysis, but the simple truths underneath all the complicated theology. That evil was real, that it was powerful, that it was patient, and that fighting it required more than just good intentions. I was still reading when the radio crackled to life. "Ranger Millfield, you there?" It was Hayes, and he sounded shaken. "Yeah, Sheriff. What's wrong?" "Got another missing person rep. Orto hiker named Tom Bradley, age 22. Last seen heading into White Oak Canyon 3 days ago. His car's still in the parking area." My blood went cold. 3 days? That was before we sealed off the area. That's what I'm thinking. Gus, what if there's another way into that cave system? What if we didn't get it all? I was already reaching for my gear. "I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. But as I drove through the darkness toward White Oak Canyon, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. The creature had told me it was bound to the mountain, not just to one cave. And it had been here for centuries, feeding on the lost and desperate, growing stronger with each victim. How many other openings were there? How many other ways could it reach out and call to people? When I reached the canyon, Hayes was already there with his deputy, Jim Morrison. They had Tom Bradley's car surrounded with flares, and they'd found his camping gear neatly arranged in the back seat. "Any sign of where he went?" I asked. Morrison pointed up the canyon wall. "Fresh scratches on the rocks up there. Looks like he was using climbing gear." I followed his flashlight beam and saw what he meant. About 30 feet up the canyon wall, there were metal pitons driven into the rock, and above them, barely visible in the darkness, was another cave opening. "Jesus," Hayes muttered. "How many of these things are there?" I thought about the creature's words. I walked these ridges when your people still cowered in caves across the great water. Not just one cave, the whole mountain. "All of them," I said. "The whole mountain is honeycomb with these caves, and they're all connected." As if to prove my point, we heard it. That same low, rumbling sound from deep underground. But this time it was coming from multiple directions, echoing through the canyon like the mountain itself was breathing. "We need help," Hayes said. "Federal help. Maybe the FBI has people who deal with this kind of thing." I shook my head. They wouldn't believe us. And even if they did, what could they do? You can't arrest something like that. You can't kill it with guns and badges. "Then what do we do?" I looked up at the cave opening, then back at my friends. Hayes was a good man, a faithful husband and father. Morrison was young, barely out of the police academy, with his whole life ahead of him. They deserved better than to die in a cave, impaled on a stone spike while that thing fed on their despair. But someone had to go up there. Someone had to find Tom Bradley, if he was still alive. Someone had to learn how extensive the cave system was, how many openings there were, how far the creature's influence extended. Someone who had already stared into the abyss and come back with his sanity intact. "I go alone," I said. "You two stay here and make sure nothing comes out." "Like hell," Hayes said. "We're coming with you." "No, you're not." I pulled the rosary from my pocket and held it up. "This is the only thing that kept us alive down there. One rosary for one person. I won't risk your lives on faith I'm not even sure I have." Before they could argue, I started climbing. The pitons were solid, and whoever had placed them, Tom Bradley probably, had known what he was doing. But as I climbed higher, I could feel something watching me from the cave opening above. The entrance was different from the one we'd used that morning. This one was larger, more like a natural cave mouth than the narrow tunnel we'd crawled through. I could smell sulfur and something else, fresh blood. I turned on my flashlight and stepped inside. The cave opened immediately into a large chamber, and I could see that this was the main entrance to the system. The walls were covered with the same symbols we'd seen before, but these were older, deeper, carved with more care. And in the center of the chamber was something that made my heart sink. An altar. A real altar, made from carved stone with channels cut into its surface to carry blood down into basins at its base. And lying on it, very much alive but unable to move, was Tom Bradley. His eyes tracked to me as I approached, wide with terror, but aware. He'd been paralyzed somehow, able to see and hear, but not move or speak. "Don't worry," I told him, though I wasn't sure how I was going to get him out of here. "I'm going to get you home." That's when I heard the laughter. "Augustus, I wondered when you would come." The creature emerged from the shadows at the back of the chamber, but it looked different now. Smaller, more human, almost weak. The binding ritual had hurt it more than it had let on. "You cannot save him," it said, gesturing toward Tom. "He came to me willingly, drawn by dreams of his dead brother." By the time he realized the truth, it was too late. I looked more closely at Tom Bradley and saw the truth in his eyes. He hadn't been paralyzed. He'd been marked. The creature had put some kind of claim on him, and now he was slowly dying, his life force being drained to feed the thing that held him. "Let him go," I said, raising the rosary. "Take me instead." The creature smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "Oh, Augustus, do you think I want just one more meal? I have been bound to this mountain for 3 centuries, fed only on the occasional lost soul. But you could give me so much more." It gestured, and the chamber filled with that same false vision as before. But this time, instead of showing me my lost faith, it showed me the future. I saw myself as a minister again, but not in some small mountain church. I saw myself on television, preaching to millions, speaking words that sounded like hope but were really despair. I saw people coming to me in their darkest moments, seeking comfort, and finding instead a subtle poison that would eventually lead them to these caves. "I could make you the most successful evangelist in history," the creature said. "People would flock to you drawn by your sincerity, your genuine desire to help. And you would help them, right into my waiting arms." The vision was seductive. I would have my faith back, my purpose restored. I would be able to comfort the suffering and guide the lost. All I had to do was accept that some of them would have to die to feed the thing that made it all possible. "No," I said, but my voice was weaker than before. "Think of the good you could do, Augustus. Think of the souls you could save. Is one life," it gestured toward Tom Bradley, "worth condemning millions to despair?" I looked at Tom, dying slowly on that ancient altar, and I thought about Jennifer Walsh, who had died with a smile on her face because she'd been promised reunion with people she'd lost. I thought about all the skeletons in that collapsed chamber, people who had come here seeking something they couldn't find in the world above. And I realized something the creature didn't understand. "You're right," I said. "I can't save him. I can't save any of them. I'm not strong enough, not faithful enough. I'm just a washed-up chaplain who lost his faith in a frozen trench in Korea." The creature leaned forward eagerly, sensing victory. "But I know someone who is strong enough," I continued, and began to pray again. Not to God this time, but to something even older and more powerful. The faith of the people who had carved those symbols into the cave walls. The Native Americans who had bound this creature in the first place. The Christian missionaries who had added their crosses to the ancient markings. The Jewish settlers who had carved stars of David next to Cherokee spirals. All the believers who had stood against this darkness and refused to let it win. I call on the faith of all who came before, I said, and the rosary began to glow again. I call on the strength of those who died rather than serve evil. I call on the hope of those who believed even when belief brought only suffering. The creature screamed and rushed toward me. But the light from the rosary was joined by light from the symbols on the walls. All the symbols, from every faith, blazing with the accumulated belief of centuries. "You cannot banish me," it shrieked. "I am bound here. I am part of this mountain." "I'm not trying to banish you," I said, understanding finally what needed to be done. "I'm accepting that binding. I'm choosing to stay and make sure you never leave." I pulled Tom Bradley from the altar and half-carried him toward the cave entrance. Behind us, the creature raged and the mountain shook, but the light held it back. At the entrance, I pushed Tom outside and called down to Hayes. "Get him out of here. Get everyone out of the park." "Gus, what about you?" I looked back at the creature, which was already beginning to recover from the blast of light. It would take more than one prayer, more than one moment of faith to hold it. It would take a lifetime of vigilance. "Someone has to stay," I called back. "Someone has to make sure it doesn't get out." I turned away from the entrance and walked back into the darkness. That was 40 years ago. I'm an old man now, 73 years old, and I've spent most of my life in these caves. Not as a prisoner. I can leave anytime I want, and I do, regularly, to resupply and check on the world above. But I always come back because someone has to watch. The creature is still here, still bound to the mountain, still hungry. But it's weaker now, fed only on the occasional lost hiker who ignores the warning signs and wanders into areas they shouldn't explore. I do my best to find them first, to lead them back to safety before they can be taken. Sometimes I fail. The Park Service thinks I'm crazy. They tolerate me because I know these mountains better than anyone, and because the missing person reports have dropped to almost nothing since I started my unofficial patrols. They call me the cave hermit and tell stories about the ranger who went a little funny after too many years alone in the woods. Let them think that. It's easier than the truth. Hayes retired 10 years ago and moved to Florida. We still exchange Christmas cards, but we never talk about what happened in White Oak Canyon. Dr. Martinez died of cancer in 2003. She never spoke about it either, but she left me her medical bag and her will, along with a note that just said, "Keep fighting the good fight." Tom Bradley lived. He became a minister, actually, working with people who've lost loved ones. He sends me letters sometimes telling me about the people he's helped, the hope he's been able to give. He doesn't remember much about his time in the cave. The creature's influence clouded his memories. But he knows something saved him that night. He attributes it to divine intervention, and maybe he's right. The rosary is still with me, though it's just beads and wire now. The real power was never in the object itself, but in what it represented. The faith of generations, the belief that good can triumph over evil, even when the people doing the believing aren't perfect. I've become something of a scholar over the years, studying the history of these mountains, learning about all the people who fought this same battle before me. The Cherokee called it the shadow that hunts. Early Christian settlers knew it as the mountain devil. During the Civil War, both Union and Confederate soldiers reported encounters with something they couldn't explain in the caves along the ridgelines. But in every generation, there have been people who stood against it. Not all of them were religious, not all of them were brave, but all of them chose to fight rather than surrender. Some died in the attempt. Others, like me, found a way to live with the burden. The creature still tries to tempt me sometimes, especially when I'm tired or lonely. It offers me the same deal: serve as its priest, help it gather followers, and in return receive power, purpose, and the faith I've spent so long trying to rebuild. Sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, the offer is almost tempting. But then I think about Jennifer Walsh smiling as she died. I think about Tom Bradley on that altar. Think about all the others who trusted something that promised them peace and found only death. And I stay. The caves are quiet now, most of the time. I've learned to seal the entrances that pose the greatest danger, though new ones open regularly as weather and time shift the mountain's bones. I've mapped the entire system, thousands of chambers connected by passages that sometimes seem to change when I'm not looking. The creature has adapted too. It's more careful now, more subtle. Instead of grand visions and false promises, it whispers doubts in the darkness. It plants suggestions in the minds of troubled hikers, leading them gradually toward the deeper caves. It's learned patience from its centuries of binding, and it knows that I won't live forever. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I'm gone. Who will take up the watch? Will the Park Service finally believe the stories and post real guards? Will they just seal all the caves and hope for the best? Or will the Ridgewalker finally break free and walk the world again? I've trained a few people over the years, other rangers, local ministers, anyone who seemed to have the right combination of faith and stubbornness. Most of them thought I was just a harmless old man with too many campfire stories. But a few understood. A few have stayed in touch, keeping an eye on the mountain from the outside, ready to help if needed. Maybe that will be enough. The sun is setting now, and I need to begin my evening patrol. The creature is always more active after dark, and there's a group of college students camping down in the valley who've been asking too many questions about local legends. I'll check on them first, make sure they're not planning any midnight cave explorations. Then I'll make my rounds through the system, checking the seals, listening for any sounds that don't belong. It's a lonely life, but it's a necessary one. And sometimes, when I'm walking through these ancient chambers with my flashlight cutting through the darkness, I feel something I haven't felt since Korea. Purpose. Not the grand, world-changing purpose the creature offers, but something smaller and more real. The knowledge that evil exists, but so does good. That some battles are worth fighting even when you can't win them completely. That faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about standing your ground when everything else falls apart. My grandmother would be proud, I think. Her rosary has done its job, even if she never knew what that job would be. The darkness is gathering outside, and somewhere deep in the mountain, something stirs. But I'm ready for it. I've been ready for 40 years. My name is Augustus Millfield, and I'm the guardian of Shenandoah National Park. Not the official guardian. That's what the rangers are for. I'm the unofficial one. The one who watches the places where maps don't go and tour guides don't take visitors. I'm the one who makes sure that when people come to these beautiful mountains looking for peace and natural wonder, they find exactly that. And nothing else. My name is Delilah Foxworth, but everyone calls me Del. I've been a forest ranger for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, drug labs, you name it, I've dealt with it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I found in November of 1987. I was 37 then, working the Daniel Boone National Forest in the Red River Gorge area. My specialty was wildlife photography and keeping track of how the forest was healing after years of coal mining. You see, these mountains have been torn apart by strip mining and deep shaft digging for over 100 years. My own daddy died in a mine collapse when I was 12. The other miners who made it out alive kept talking about shadow people they saw down there before the cave-in happened. Mama always said it was just the methane gas making them see things that weren't there. That November morning started like any other. The air was crisp, leaves crunching under my boots as I walked the old mining roads. I always carried my daddy's helmet with the miner's lamp on it, not because I believed in his ghost stories, but because it reminded me why I chose to protect these mountains instead of tearing them apart. The call came in around 9 a.m. on my radio. 3 men from a geological survey company had gone missing near the old Blackwater mine shaft. They were supposed to check if the area was safe for environmental cleanup. Their company truck was still parked at the entrance, but no sign of the men anywhere. I drove out there in my Ranger truck, bouncing over the rough dirt road that hadn't been maintained since the mine closed in '72. The Blackwater site was one of the worst. A deep shaft that went down almost 800 feet, with tunnels spreading out like spider webs underground. The mining company had just abandoned it when the coal ran out, leaving all the equipment to rust. When I got there, something felt wrong right away. Not just because 3 grown men had vanished, though that was plenty wrong by itself. The air felt heavy, like before a big storm, but the sky was clear blue. My truck's engine started knocking, which was weird because I'd just had it serviced. Even my radio started crackling with static. The men's equipment was still there, arranged in a perfect triangle about 20 feet from the mine entrance. Their cameras, measuring tools, sample bags, everything laid out neat as you please. But the batteries in all their gear were completely dead, even though the company said they'd put in fresh ones that morning. I took some pictures with my own camera and started looking around for tracks. The ground was soft from recent rain, so there should have been footprints everywhere. Instead, I found something that made my skin crawl. There were human-shaped shadows burned into the wet dirt, like someone had stood there while a bright light cast their shadow down. But the shadows didn't match any footprints. It was like the shadows were there all by themselves. The mine shaft opening looked like a huge black mouth in the hillside. The old metal frame around it was rusted worse than it should have been after only 15 years. When I got closer, my breath started making little white puffs, even though it wasn't that cold out. My daddy's helmet lamp flickered on and off by itself. I called for backup and started asking questions around the mountain communities. The old-timers knew plenty about the Blackwater mine. Turns out people had been disappearing near that shaft every 15 or 20 years, going back generations. Always the same story. Folks would go down there for one reason or another, and they'd just vanish. Equipment left behind, no bodies ever found. Mrs. Eleanor Higgins, who was 83 and sharp as a tack, told me her grandfather had worked at Blackwater before it closed the first time in 1889. There'd been a terrible accident that year, a cave-in that trapped 17 miners in the deepest part of the shaft. The company said they couldn't get the bodies out because the tunnels were too unstable. They just sealed up that section and pretended it never happened. My granddaddy was the only one who made it out alive, Mrs. Higgins said, rocking on her porch while I took notes. He never did talk about what he saw down there, but he always said the darkness in that mine wasn't natural, said it had teeth. I thought she was just repeating old mountain tales, the kind of stories that grow scarier with each telling. But that night, when I developed the pictures I'd taken at the mine site, I nearly dropped my coffee mug. In 3 of the photos, there were people-shaped shadows standing around the equipment triangle. But in the actual shots, there had been nobody there but me. The shadows looked like they were wearing old-fashioned mining clothes, overalls, work shirts, those little metal caps miners used to wear, and they seemed to be reaching toward the camera. I stared at those pictures for a long time, trying to think of rational explanations. Double exposure, maybe. Some kind of light reflection. But deep down, I was starting to think my daddy's mining buddies might have seen something real in those tunnels after all. The next morning, I decided to go back to Blackwater Mine. This time, I was going to find out what really happened to those 3 missing men. I packed extra batteries, a powerful flashlight, rope, and my daddy's helmet. Something told me I was going to need all the light I could get. The second trip to Blackwater Mine felt different from the moment I parked my truck. The November air was still and quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the usual sounds of insects. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I clipped my radio to my belt and checked my equipment twice. The fresh batteries I'd put in everything that morning were already showing half power, which made no sense at all. My daddy's helmet lamp was acting up again, flickering whenever I faced the mine entrance. The metal framework around the shaft looked worse than it had the day before. More rust, like years had passed instead of just 24 hours. Some of the support beams were starting to sag. I made a note to recommend the site be marked as structurally dangerous. I called down the shaft, cupping my hands around my mouth. "Hello? Anyone down there? This is Park Ranger Foxworth." My voice echoed back strange, like it was being twisted around in the tunnels below. And then, just for a second, I heard something else. Whispers. Lots of them, all talking at once, too quiet to make out words. I turned on my big flashlight and aimed it down the shaft. The beam only went about 50 feet before the darkness seemed to swallow it up. There were wooden platforms built into the shaft walls every 20 feet or so, with rusty ladders connecting them. The surveyor team had probably used those to climb down. As I stood there trying to decide whether to follow them, Something moved in my peripheral vision. I spun around, flashlight raised, but saw nothing except the rust-colored trees. Still, I had the strongest feeling that someone was watching me. "Must be nerves," I muttered, but I kept looking over my shoulder. I started down the ladder, testing each rung before putting my full weight on it. The wood creaked and groaned, but held. 20 feet down, I reached the first platform and called out again. This time, the echo came back clearer, and I definitely heard whispering voices mixed in with it. "Help! Us!" The words were so faint I almost thought I'd imagined them, but my skin prickled up in goosebumps anyway. 40 feet down, the air got noticeably colder. My breath started steaming, and the metal ladder rungs felt like ice through my work gloves. 60 feet down, my flashlight beam started acting strange, bending and wavering like I was underwater. At the 80-foot platform, I found the first real clue about the missing surveyors. Scratched into the wooden planks were the words, "They're coming up," in shaky capital letters. The wood around the scratches looked fresh, like someone had just carved them. I took pictures of the message, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the viewfinder of my camera, I could see shadowy figures moving on the platforms below me. But when I looked with my own eyes, the platforms were empty. I kept climbing down, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. At 120 feet, I found a surveyor's hard hat caught on a broken ladder rung. There was a long crack running down the back of it, and the inside was stained with something dark that I didn't want to think about too hard. By the time I reached the 160-foot level, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight. The whispering was getting louder, and I was starting to make out actual words. "Join us. Stay with us. Work with us forever." The voices sounded like they were coming from everywhere at once, above me, below me, from inside the shaft walls themselves. And they were getting closer. That's when I saw him. On the platform just below me, a man in old-fashioned mining clothes was standing with his back to the ladder. His clothes were tattered and stained with something that looked like coal dust, but wrong somehow. Too dark, too thick. He wasn't moving, just standing there like he was waiting for something. "Excuse me," I called down to him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you hurt? I'm here to help." The figure slowly turned around to face me, and I nearly fell off the ladder. He didn't have a face, just smooth darkness where his features should have been, like someone had cut a person-shaped hole in the air itself. When he opened his mouth to speak, it was like looking into a deep pit. "You're Ezra Foxworth's girl," he said, in a voice like gravel sliding down a mountainside. "We've been waiting for you to come home." I scrambled up the ladder as fast as I could, my heart hammering against my ribs. Behind me, I could hear more voices calling out, and the sound of footsteps, or something like footsteps, following me up the shaft. The climb back to the surface felt like it took forever. My flashlight kept dimming, no matter how fresh the batteries were supposed to be. The shadowy figures were getting closer, their whispers turning into urgent calls. "Don't leave us. Help us. Your family owes us." I hauled myself out of that mine shaft and ran for my truck without looking back. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw dark shapes standing around the mine entrance, watching me go. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what the shadow thing had said about my family owing them something, and about how he'd known my daddy's name. I drove over to Mrs. Higgins' house the next morning and asked her to tell me everything she knew about her grandfather and the 1889 mining accident. What she told me changed everything I thought I knew about my own family history. "Your great-granddaddy Ezra was working that shift too," she said, pouring me coffee with hands that trembled just a little. "He was the other man who made it out alive. But my granddaddy always said Ezra made some kind of deal with whatever was down there in the dark. Said that's the only reason either of them survived." I stared at her, feeling pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking together in my mind. "What kind of deal?" I asked. Mrs. Higgins looked out the window toward the mountains, where the Blackwater mine was hidden among the trees. "The kind that protects your bloodline," she said quietly, "but doesn't come free. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about the 1889 Blackwater mine disaster. The official reports were locked away in the state archives in Frankfurt, but the local newspaper from back then told a different story than what the mining company had put out. According to the Cumberland County Herald, 17 miners had been working the deepest shaft when they broke through into what they thought was a natural cave system. But instead of finding more coal, they'd hit something the reporter called an ancient darkness that had been sleeping in the mountain's heart. The article was written in that flowery, old-fashioned way, but between the lines, you could tell the reporter had talked to survivors who were scared out of their minds. They described a black mist that poured out of the cave opening and shadows that moved on their own, reaching for the miners like hungry hands. My great-granddaddy Ezra and old man Higgins had been near the shaft entrance when whatever happened down there started happening. They'd managed to get out before the tunnel collapsed, sealing the 17 other miners inside with whatever they'd awakened. But the more I read, the more I realized the story didn't end there. Every 15 to 20 years since 1889, people had gone missing near that mine. Hunters, hikers, curious teenagers, and now survey crews. Always the same pattern. They'd disappear without a trace, leaving behind equipment that looked like it had aged decades in a matter of hours. I was sitting in my cabin that evening, spreading old newspaper clippings across my kitchen table, when my radio crackled to life. "Del, you there?" It was Bobby Martinez, another ranger who worked the southern section of the forest. "I'm here, Bobby. What's up?" "I got something weird up at the old Carter mine site. Found a family of hikers' camping gear, but no sign of the people. Gear looks like it's been sitting here for years, but the site manager says they just checked in yesterday." My BS. Lude went cold. Carter Mine was only 8 miles from Blackwater, and it connected to the same underground tunnel system. "Bobby, listen to me very carefully," I said into the radio. "Do not go down into that mine. Do not even get close to the entrance after dark. I'm coming to meet you right now." "Del, you're scaring me here. What's going on?" "Just trust me. And Bobby, keep your lights on. All of them." I grabbed my equipment and headed out, but I was too late. When I got to the Carter site, Bobby's truck was there, but Bobby wasn't. His radio was on the ground next to the mine entrance, crackling with static. In the static, I could just make out voices whispering his name. I called for backup and started searching the area around the mine. That's when I found the photographs. Someone had scattered pictures all around the entrance, old black and white photos of miners from the 1800s. But as I looked closer, I realized some of the faces in the pictures were people I recognized. The 3 missing surveyors, Bobby Martinez, even myself. In every photo, we were dressed in old mining clothes and standing in a line with the other miners. Our faces looked wrong somehow, like they'd been drained of something essential. And our eyes were completely black, like pools of coal tar. I was studying the pictures when I heard Bobby calling for help from somewhere deep in the mine. His voice echoed up from the darkness, scared and desperate. "Del, help me! I'm trapped down here and something's coming." Every instinct I had told me it was a trap, but Bobby was my friend, and I couldn't just leave him down there. I clipped on my daddy's helmet, switched on the lamp, and started down into the Carter mine shaft. This shaft was shallower than Blackwater, but just as dark. The wooden platforms were in worse shape, rotting and sagging under my weight. About 40 feet down, I found Bobby, his flashlight smashed to pieces against the shaft wall. "Bobby," I called. "Where are you?" "Down here." His voice came from much deeper in the mine. "Hurry, Del. They're all around me." As I climbed deeper, the air got thick and hard to breathe. My helmet lamp started flickering again, and I could see shadowy shapes moving just at the edge of the light. They were following me down, staying just far enough away that I couldn't get a clear look at them. At the bottom of the shaft, I found a tunnel entrance that definitely hadn't been on any of the old mine maps. It sloped downward into complete darkness, and Bobby's voice was coming from somewhere inside it. I followed the tunnel for what felt like miles, though it was probably only a few hundred yards. The walls were carved out of solid rock, too smooth and regular to be natural, and there were symbols scratched into the stone, not letters or words, but shapes that hurt to look at directly. The tunnel opened up into a huge underground chamber that took my breath away. It was bigger than a cathedral, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above my head. And it was full of people. At first, I thought they were the missing hikers and surveyors. But as I got closer, I realized these weren't people anymore. They were shadows shaped like people, standing in perfect rows like they were waiting for orders. Their clothes were from different time periods. Some wore modern hiking gear, others had on mining clothes from decades past. And standing in front of them all was Bobby Martinez. At least, it looked like Bobby, but his skin was gray and his eyes were solid black. When he smiled at me, his teeth looked like chips of coal. "Glad you could make it, Del," he said in Bobby's voice, but wrong somehow, flatter. "The Shadow Clan has been waiting for you to join the family business." That's when I realized what this place really was. It wasn't just a cave system. It was some kind of gathering place for whatever lived in the deepest parts of the mountain. The 17 miners from 1889 were here, along with E. Everyone else who'd disappeared over the years. But they weren't dead. They were something else now. Something that worked for the darkness. "Your great-granddaddy made us a promise," the Bobby thing said, stepping closer. "Protection for his bloodline, in exchange for service when the time came. Well, Del, the time has come." I backed away, but there were shadows moving behind me now, cutting off my escape route. The helmet lamp was getting dimmer by the second, and I could feel something cold and hungry reaching for me from all directions. "We've been patient," Bobby's voice continued, "but the mountain is angry about all the damage from the surface. The strip mining, the chemicals, the disrespect. It's time for the Foxworths to honor their agreement and help us protect what's ours." I felt something touch my shoulder, fingers made of living darkness. My daddy's helmet lamp flickered one more time, and then went out completely, leaving me alone in the dark with things that shouldn't exist. But just before the light died, I saw something that gave me hope. The helmet itself, the actual metal part that had belonged to my daddy, was glowing with a faint light of its own, and where that light touched the shadow things, they pulled back like it was burning them. That old coal miner's helmet was made of iron, and I was starting to remember some of the stories my granny used to tell about things that lived in the deep places of the earth and what could keep them at bay. I wasn't dead yet, which meant I still had a chance to figure out how to fight back. In the complete darkness of that underground chamber, I felt around the metal surface of my daddy's helmet until I found the battery connection for the lamp. The batteries were dead, but the metal itself was warm to the touch and seemed to be giving off its own faint glow. The shadow things were circling around me, just outside the helmet's protective aura. I could hear them whispering to each other in voices that sounded like wind through empty mine shafts. "She has the Iron Crown," one of them hissed. "The protection mark, cannot touch while she wears it." "But she must choose," said another voice that sounded like Bobby. "Family debt must be paid. The mountain demands justice for its wounds." That's when I understood what my great-granddaddy Ezra had really done in 1889. When those 17 miners broke through into this ancient chamber and woke up whatever lived here, he'd made a bargain to save his own life. The Shadow Clan would let him go free, and they'd protect his family from harm. But in exchange, when the mountain got angry enough about what humans were doing to it, the Foxworths would have to serve as guardians. "What kind of service?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The shadows shifted and whispered among themselves. Finally, the thing wearing Bobby's face stepped forward just to the edge of where my helmet's glow ended. "The mountain is dying," he said. "Strip mining, acid runoff, chemical dumping. Every wound goes deep, poisoning the water and the stone. We were the first guardians, but we failed. The mining companies sealed us away instead of listening to our warnings." Around the chamber, I could see more shadow figures gathering, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. All the people who'd disappeared over the past century, transformed into something between human and spirit. "Now the damage is too great for the mountain to heal itself," Bobby continued. It needs human helpers who can work in the daylight world, environmental lawyers, government inspectors, park rangers, people who can fight the destroyers with their own weapons, laws and regulations and public pressure. I looked around at all those shadow faces, and suddenly I saw them differently. They weren't monsters trying to trap me. They were the mountain's immune system trying to protect something precious from being destroyed forever. But why did you have to take them? I asked G, gesturing at the crowd of shadow people. Why couldn't you just ask for help? The Bobby Thing's expression grew sad. We tried asking. For over 100 years we tried. But humans don't listen to voices from the darkness. They only pay attention when people disappear, when the consequences get too big to ignore. A new voice spoke from the shadows, older, with the accent of the mountains. Delilah Foxworth. I turned toward the voice and saw a man in mining clothes from the 1880s walking toward me. His face was more solid than the others, more human, but his eyes held the same ancient sadness. "I'm your great-granddaddy Ezra," he said. "I've been waiting a long time to explain what I did, and why." Looking at him, I could see the family resemblance, the same stubborn jaw, the same deep-set eyes. But there was something else in his face, a weight of years and regret that no human should have to carry. "I was young and scared when we broke through into this chamber," he said. "My friends were dying, being pulled into the darkness, and I made a desperate deal to save myself. I promised that my family would serve the mountain when it needed us most. But I never told them about the bargain. I thought maybe it would never come due." "But it has," I said. He nodded. "The mining companies are coming back, Del. New technology, deeper shafts, chemicals that will poison the groundwater for generations. The mountain can't fight them alone." Around us, the shadow people were pressing closer. I could feel their hunger, not for my life, but for my help. They wanted me to join them, to become another guardian spirit working to protect the mountain from destruction. "What happens if I say yes?" I asked. "You become like us," Ezra said, "neither fully alive nor fully dead. You can appear human when you need to, work in the daylight world, use the legal system to protect the mountains, but this chamber becomes your true home. The darkness becomes part of you." "And if I say no?" The silence that followed was heavy with sadness. "Then the mountain dies," Bobby said, quietly. "And eventually everything dies with it. The poison spreads from the groundwater to the rivers, from the rivers to the ocean. The whole ecosystem collapses, piece by piece." I thought about my daddy, dying young in a mine collapse because safety regulations weren't strong enough. I thought about all the mountaintops that had been stripped bare, all the streams running orange with acid runoff. I thought about what these mountains might look like in 50 years if nothing changed. But I also thought about what it would mean to give up my human life, to become something caught between worlds. "There's got to be another way," I said. "Some middle ground." Ezra stepped closer, and I could see hope flickering in his shadow-dark eyes. "There might be," he said slowly. "If you're willing to carry the Iron Crown and serve as a bridge between our world and yours. Keep your human life, but accept the responsibility of protecting the mountain. When we need help in the daylight world, you answer the call. And in exchange, we stop taking people. We work with you instead of through fear. But if you fail us, if the mountain dies because you couldn't protect it," he didn't need to finish the sentence. I looked around at all those shadow faces, at people who'd given up everything to become guardians of something larger than themselves. And I thought about my great-granddaddy's helmet, warm and protective on my head, and the generations of Foxworths who'd carried the weight of his bargain without even knowing it. "I accept," I said. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt something change inside me. Not transformation into shadow, but a connection to the mountain, to the deep places, to the ancient responsibility of protecting what couldn't protect itself. The shadow people began to fade, but not into nothingness, into a kind of watchful waiting, like they were step, ping back, but staying ready to help when needed. "Thank you," Ezra said, and for the first time since I'd entered the chamber, he smiled. "Now let's get you back to the surface. You've got work to do." The climb back to the surface took hours, but I wasn't alone. I could feel the Shadow Clan around me, guiding me through passages I never would have found on my own. When I finally emerged from the Carter mine shaft, it was dawn, and my radio was crackling with search and rescue teams looking for Bobby and me. Bobby was waiting by his truck, looking confused but alive. He had no memory of going down into the mine, just waking up in the forest with a terrible headache. The official report listed it as a case of methane gas exposure causing temporary disorientation. But I knew better. The Shadow Clan had given him back when I accepted their bargain. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing changes in myself. I could see things in the darkness that other people couldn't. I knew somehow when the mountain was in pain, when a new mining permit was filed, when chemicals leaked into a stream, when ancient tree groves were marked for cutting, and I found I had help I'd never expected. Documents started appearing on my desk, environmental impact studies that mining companies had tried to hide, financial records showing illegal dumping, photographs of protected species in areas marked for development. When I asked my supervisor where they came from, he'd just shrug and say they'd been delivered anonymously. I became an environmental lawyer like the Shadow Clan had suggested, using my knowledge of the mountains and my new supernatural allies to fight the companies that wanted to tear them apart. I won cases I had no business winning, with evidence that appeared just when I needed it most. The missing person reports around the old mine sites stopped. Instead of disappearing, people who wandered too close to the deep places would find themselves gently turned around, led back to safety by helpful shadows that they'd later convince themselves were just tricks of the light. But the real change came 6 months later when Appalachian Mining Corp announced plans to reopen the Blackwater site with new deep drilling technology. The same day they filed their permits, I found a manila envelope on my cabin doorstep containing their complete internal communications, including emails where executives laughed about bribing state inspectors and discussed covering up groundwater contamination. That night I put on my daddy's helmet and walked out to the Blackwater mine entrance. The shadows were waiting for me. "Ready to go to work?" I asked them. The answer came as a whisper from dozens of voices. "We've been ready for over a century." It took 3 years of legal battles, but we stopped the Blackwater reopening. The environmental lawsuit led to a federal investigation, which led to criminal charges, which led to new regulations that protected thousands of acres of mountain wilderness. I still work as a park ranger, but now it's more than just a job. I'm a guardian, protecting something ancient and irreplaceable from people who see the mountains as nothing but resources to be extracted. Sometimes, late at night, I go down into the old mines to check on my shadow allies. They're still there, still watching, still waiting. But they're not hungry anymore. They're hopeful, because they know that as long as someone stands between the mountain and those who would destroy it, the ancient darkness will have light to balance it, and the deep places will have a voice in the world above. My name is Delilah Foxworth, and I carry my great-granddaddy's promise. Some debts are worth inheriting, especially when paying them means protecting something that can't protect itself. The Shadow Clan still watches over these mountains, but now they're not watching alone. And sometimes when the moon is dark and the mining companies are getting too bold, you can see us working together, human hands and shadow shapes, fighting to keep the ancient places safe from those who would tear them apart for profit. The mountain remembers its guardians, and we remember our promise. My name is Rebecca Ashworth, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 9 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, drug runners, you name it. But January of 1975 taught me there are things in these hills that don't belong in any ranger handbook. The weather report that morning said we were in for a bad one. The worst blizzard in 50 years, they claimed. Temperatures dropping to 15 below zero. I was stationed at the White Oak Sink area, way back in the back country where most folks never venture. It's a strange place, even on good days, a massive sinkhole with caves that seem to go on forever. The Cherokee used to avoid this spot in winter. My great-grandfather told me stories about why, but I never paid them much mind. I should have listened. The storm hit around noon, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen. Snow came down in thick, swirling curtains that made it hard to see 10 feet ahead. The radio crackled with emergency calls from all over the park, then went dead around 3 o'clock. The phone lines were down too. I was completely cut off from the outside world. That first night I huddled in the ranger station with my German Shepherd Max, listening to the wind howl through the trees like something alive and angry. Max kept whining and pacing, which wasn't like him at all. He'd press his nose against the windows, then back away with his tail between his legs. "What's got into you, boy?" I asked him, scratching behind his ears. But deep down, I felt it too. That prickly feeling on the back of your neck when you know something's watching you. The next morning brought an eerie quiet. The snow had stopped falling, but it lay 3 feet deep everywhere. I strapped on my snowshoes and decided to check on the Hendricks family. They had a cabin about 2 miles up the trail, and with weather like this, they might need supplies or medical help. The walk took me twice as long as usual. Every step was hard work, and the cold bit through my jacket like it was made of paper. But what bothered me most was the silence. No birds, no squirrels chattering, no sound at all except the crunch of snow under my shoes. Even Max seemed spooked, staying close to my side instead of running ahead like he usually did. The Hendricks cabin sat in a small clearing, looking picture-perfect with snow piled on its roof and icicles hanging from the eaves. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney, but there was none. The windows were dark. I knocked on the door. "Hello, Mr. Hendricks? It's Ranger Ashworth." Nothing. I tried the handle. The door wasn't locked, which was odd. Mountain folks always lock their doors, especially with strangers around. "I'm coming in," I called out, pushing the door open. The smell hit me first. Not death, exactly, but something wrong. Stale air and fear. The cabin was freezing inside, colder than it should have been even without heat. And there, in the middle of the main room, I found them. The whole family, Jim and Sarah Hendricks, and their 3 kids, sitting in a perfect circle on the floor. All of them facing inward, like they'd been having some kind of meeting. All of them dead. But they didn't look like they'd frozen to death. They looked like they'd starved. Their faces were gaunt, cheeks sunken in, eyes hollow. Their clothes hung loose on their bodies like they'd lost a lot of weight very fast. The strangest part was their expressions, not peaceful like most folks who freeze, but terrified. Their mouths were open like they'd been screaming. I checked the kitchen. The pantry was full. Canned goods, dried meat, flour, sugar, enough food to last a month. None of it touched. The refrigerator still had fresh meat and vegetables, though they were starting to spoil now. Why would a family starve to death surrounded by food? I radioed for backup, but got only static. The phones were still dead. I was on my own with 5 corpses and more questions than answers. Standard procedure said I should secure the scene and wait for the medical examiner, but with the roads blocked by snow, that could be days. As the sun started to set, I made a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life. I decided to stay in the cabin overnight to guard the bodies. I brought Max inside and built up the fire, trying to make the place feel less like a tomb. That's when I heard the crying. It was faint at first, almost like the wind. But winds don't sob. Winds don't call for their mothers. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the mountains in a way that made my skin crawl. Max heard it too. He pressed against my legs, trembling. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. The crying stopped immediately, like whatever was making it knew I was listening. But in the beam of my light, I saw something that made my blood turn cold. Tracks in the snow, leading from the woods to the cabin and back again. They looked almost human, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. And they were huge, at least size 15, maybe bigger. The tracks led straight to the cabin door, then circled the building 3 times before heading back into the forest toward White Oak Sink. I followed them about 20 yards before common sense kicked in. Whatever made these tracks was still out there somewhere, and I was alone in the wilderness with nothing but a .38 revolver and a scared dog. Back inside the cabin, I tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe a bear had wandered through after the family died. Maybe the tracks belonged to a lost hiker with big feet. But bears don't make tracks like that, and hikers don't circle cabins 3 times in the middle of a blizzard. As I sat by the fire that night, staring at the dead family arranged in their impossible circle, I remembered something my great-grandfather used to say. The mountains get hungry sometimes, Becca, and when they do, they take what they need. I'd always thought it was just an old man's story, Cherokee folklore mixed with too much moonshine. Now I wasn't so sure. I didn't sleep much that first night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear that crying again, sometimes close, sometimes far away, always just at the edge of hearing. Max never settled down either. He spent the whole night pacing from window to window, whining low in his throat. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted, but determined to get some answers. I took photos of everything with my old Polaroid camera. The bodies, the full pantry, those strange tracks outside. Then I loaded the Hendricks family into the back of my truck. It wasn't proper procedure, but I couldn't leave them there another night. The drive back to the ranger station was treacherous. The snow had drifted across the road in places, and twice I had to get out and shovel. But it wasn't the snow that bothered me. It was the feeling that something was following us. I kept checking my mirrors, but all I saw was empty white forest. Still, Max whined and paced in the truck bed, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. Back at the station, I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. The phone lines were down, too. I was completely cut off with 5 dead bodies and no way to get help. That's when I remembered the Morrison cabin. It was about a mile east of the Hendricks place, closer to the main road. If the Morrisons were okay, maybe they could help me get word out about what had happened. But something in my gut told me they wouldn't be okay. I left Max at the station to guard the bodies and set out on foot. The Morrison place was harder to reach. The traitos wound through dense woods and crossed a frozen creek twice. By the time I got there, the sun was already sinking toward the mountains. The Morrison cabin looked just like the Hendricks place had. Dark windows, no smoke from the chimney, snow piled on the roof like a burial shroud. The front door was standing wide open. I drew my gun before stepping inside. "Hello? Anyone here?" The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. And then I saw them. Tom Morrison, his wife Linda, and their teenage son, Billy. Sitting in a perfect circle in the middle of the living room, all facing inward. All dead from starvation, despite the fact that their kitchen was fully stocked. The same hollow cheeks, the same terrified expressions, the same impossible death by hunger surrounded by plenty. But this time, there was something else. Scratches on the walls, long, deep gouges in the wood that looked like claw marks. And in the center of the circle where the family sat, someone had carved a symbol into the floor. It was crude, but clear. A twisted tree with no leaves and roots that looked more like grasping fingers. I'd seen that symbol before, years ago, in one of my great-grandfather's old books. It was Cherokee, but not the kind of Cherokee symbol they taught in school. This was older, darker. Something from the time before the white man came, when the mountains held different kinds of spirits. I took more photos, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the camera steady. The scratches on the walls were at least 8 feet high. Whatever made them was tall, very tall. As I was preparing to leave, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate steps that creaked the rafters above my head. Step, step, step. Moving from one end of the cabin to the other, then back again. I crept to the window and peered out, but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, moving along the side of the cabin now, circling. I waited, gun drawn, barely breathing. The steps came around to the front of the cabin and stopped and eyed outside the open door. I could hear breathing, deep, ragged breaths that sounded wrong somehow. Too long, too wet. A shadow fell across the doorway. Something was standing just outside, but I couldn't see what. The shadow was tall, much taller than any person should be. Max started barking somewhere in the distance. The sound echoed through the mountains, and whatever was outside the door made a noise I'll never forget. Not quite a growl, not quite a scream. The sound a person might make if they were dying of hunger. Then the shadow was gone. The breathing stopped. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, I saw the same tracks I'd found at the Hendricks place, leading from the cabin into the woods toward White Oak Sink. I ran all the way back to the ranger station, crashing through snowdrifts and stumbling over hidden rocks. Max was waiting for me, tail wagging, but he kept looking past me toward the woods with worried eyes. That night, I barricaded the station door and windows. I kept the fire burning bright and all the lights on. Every few minutes, I'd hear that crying again, closer now, sometimes right outside the walls. Around midnight, the crying stopped, but something worse replaced it, scratching. Long, slow scratches against the outer walls of the station, moving from window to window, testing each one. The sound of claws on wood made my teeth ache. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, but when I looked out the windows, I saw nothing but darkness. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, sometimes at the walls, sometimes on the roof, sometimes so close to the windows that the glass fogged with breath. Whatever was out there was big, hungry, and it knew I was inside. When dawn finally came, the scratching stopped. I found tracks all around the building, the same impossible tracks, circling the station dozens of times. But it was what I found in my truck that really scared me. All my emergency food supplies were gone, not just taken, destroyed. Cans torn open and the contents scattered in the snow. Crackers crushed too, powder. Even my coffee was ruined, the grounds mixed with snow and leaves. Something didn't want me to eat. I was trapped in the mountains with a creature that killed by starvation, and now it was trying to starve me too. By the third day, I was starting to understand what the Hendricks and Morrison families had gone through. Despite the cold that should have made me ravenous, I felt no hunger at all. Worse than that, the thought of food made me sick to my stomach. I forced myself to eat a can of beans I'd hidden inside the station, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. My body rejected it immediately, and I spent 20 minutes throwing up behind the building. Max wouldn't eat either, though he kept pawing at his food bowl and whining. That afternoon, I decided to search the other cabins in the area. If this thing was killing families, I needed to know how many victims there were. I found the Johnsons 3 miles north of the station. Same circle arrangement, same starved faces, same scratches on the walls. Their pantry was untouched, but there was something new this time. Words carved into the kitchen table with those terrible claws. Still hungry. The Patel family was next, then the old widow Crawford. Each cabin told the same story. Families sitting in perfect circles, facing inward, dead from starvation, surrounded by food. The scratch marks got deeper each time, and the carved messages got worse. Feed me. Not enough. Still empty. By sunset, I'd counted 14 dead. 14 people who'd starved to death in 3 days during a blizzard, with kitchens full of food just steps away. But it was at the last cabin that I finally saw it. The Clearys lived furthest from the main road, in a little shack that backed up against White Oak Sink itself. When I arrived, the front door was hanging off its hinges. Inside, the family was arranged in their death circle. But this time, there was something different. The circle wasn't complete. Mrs. Cleary was missing. There were drag marks in the blood on the floor, leading from her spot in the circle out the back door toward the sinkhole. I followed the trail through the snow, my heart hammering against my ribs. The drag marks led right to the edge of White Oak Sink, that massive hole in the earth where limestone had collapsed into underground caves centuries ago. The tracks stopped at the rim, but I could hear something moving down in the darkness below, scraping sounds like claws on stone, and underneath that, something else. Chewing. Wet, hungry chewing sounds, echoing up from the depths of the earth. I aimed my flashlight down into the sinkhole. The beam only reached about 30 feet before the darkness swallowed it. But in that circle of light, I saw bones. Human bones, picked clean and white as snow. Some of them looked old, really old, like they'd been there for decades, but others were fresh, still bloody. As I stared into that pit of death, something stared back. Two yellow eyes, glowing in the darkness far below. Eyes that belonged to something tall and thin and wrong. It was crouched over what looked like a human body, but when my light hit it, the thing looked up at me with a face that made me scream. It had been human once, maybe. The basic shape was there. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But everything was stretched out and twisted. The arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. The fingers ended in claws that looked like broken bones. Its face was gaunt and hollow, with skin pulled tight over a skull that seemed too big. But the worst part was its mouth. When it saw me, it smiled, and I saw rows of yellowed teeth filed to sharp points. Its lips were stained with fresh blood. The thing that had been Mrs. Cleary lay beneath it, torn open like a Christmas present. The creature remade that sound again, not quite a growl, not quite a scream, the sound of endless, desperate hunger. Then it started climbing toward me, its claws digging into the limestone walls like it was walking upstairs. I ran. I ran through the woods like the devil himself was chasing me, crashing through snowdrifts and fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear it coming, the sound of claws on stone, then on earth, then on snow, getting closer. I made it to the Cleary cabin and slammed the door behind me, throwing the bolt. Outside, something slammed into the walls hard enough to shake the whole building. The scratching started immediately. Long, patient scratches that worked their way around the entire cabin. Then silence. I waited, gun ready, trying to calm my breathing. Maybe it had given up. Maybe it had gone back to its hole to finish its meal. A board creaked overhead. It was on the roof. The thing was directly above me, moving slowly across the ceiling. I could hear each footstep, each creak of the rafters. It stopped right over the spot where I was standing. Then it started digging. Claws tore through the wooden shingles like they were made of paper. Splinters rained down on my head as it carved a hole in the roof. In seconds, I could see stars through the gap it had made. A long, pale arm reached through the hole, feeling around blindly. The claws were longer than my fingers, sharp as razors. I shot it. The rifle boom was deafening in the small cabin. The creature shrieked, a sound like a steam whistle mixed with a dying animal. Its arm jerked back through the hole, dripping black blood onto the floor. The scratching on the roof stopped. After a few minutes, I heard it moving away back toward the sinkhole. But as it left, it spoke. Not words exactly, but something that my brain translated into meaning. The voice was like wind through dead leaves, like the last breath of a dying man. "Hungry," it whispered. "So hungry. Always hungry." And underneath that, something else. Something that chilled me more than the creature's appearance or its claws or its terrible feast. It knew my name. "Rebecca," it called as it disappeared into the darkness. "Great-great-granddaughter. Come home to grandfather. Come feed the family." I stayed in that cabin until dawn, shivering and sick, while the truth slowly sank in. The thing in White Oak's sink wasn't just some random monster. It was family. The walk back to the ranger station felt like a funeral march. My legs were weak from hunger and fear, but I forced myself to move. I had to get to my great-grandfather's old trunk, the one I'd inherited when he died. If this creature really was family, there might be something in his papers that could help me understand what I was dealing with. Max was waiting for me at the station, but he looked as sick as I felt. His ribs were starting to show through his fur, and his eyes had that hollow look I'd seen on all the dead families. The trunk was in the back storage room, covered with dust and spider webs. Inside, I found the usual things: old photos, military medals from World War I, some Cherokee artifacts. But at the bottom, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a leather journal written in my great-grandfather's careful handwriting. Most of it was in Cherokee, which I couldn't read very well, but scattered through the pages were English entries, and one of them made my hands shake. The hunger came to our family during the long walk to the western lands. Great-grandfather Two Bears was a medicine man, keeper of the old ways. When the soldiers forced us to leave our homes, he spoke against it. Said the mountains would call us back, that we belonged to this land as much as it belonged to us. On the trail, the food ran out. People were dying every day. The old ones, the children, the weak ones first. Great-grandfather Two Bears watched his wife waste away to nothing, watched his youngest son die in his arms from starvation. That's when he made this. He choice that cursed our bloodline. He ate them. First his dead son to keep the body from going to waste, then others who had died. He told himself it was survival, that the dead couldn't object to feeding the living. But the hunger grew stronger each time. Soon, he wasn't waiting for people to die. The other Cherokee cast him out when they discovered what he was doing, left him behind on the trail to die alone. But he didn't die. The hunger kept him alive, changed him into something else, something that could never be satisfied, no matter how much it consumed. He came back to these mountains because this was where he belonged, made his home in the deep caves of White Oak Sink. And every winter, when the hunger grew strongest, he would feed. The families that disappeared over the years, the Atkinsons in 1902, the Bells in 1913, the whole Murphy clan in 1925, they all fed the hunger, always in winter, always during the worst storms when no one could come looking. I've seen him twice in my life. Once when I was a boy, and once when I became a man. He let me live because I carry his blood. But he warned me that someday, the hunger might grow too strong to resist, that one of his descendants might have to choose between joining him or stopping him forever. The journal went on to describe rituals, old Cherokee ceremonies for dealing with cursed spirits, ways to cleanse a soul that had been corrupted by forbidden acts. But they all required sacrifice. The person performing the ritual had to fast completely, starving themselves while they called the spirit back to the world of the living. If they succeeded, the spirit could find peace and move on. If they failed, they would join the creature in its eternal hunger. I looked out the window toward White Oak Sink. Somewhere down in those caves, my great-great-grandfather was waiting. He'd already killed at least 14 people this winter, and he wouldn't stop until the hunger was satisfied. But how do you satisfy a hunger that's lasted over a century? As if answering my question, I heard that voice again, carried on the wind. Rebecca, come to grandfather. Come feed the empty place inside. This time I could hear something else in the voice, not just hunger, but loneliness, pain, the sound of someone who'd been alone in the darkness for too long. Maybe that's what made me do what I did next. I gathered the supplies I'd need for the ritual, sage bundles, an old Cherokee prayer pipe, some sacred tobacco my great-grandfather had left me. Then I loaded my rifle and headed for White Oak Sink. The creature was waiting for me at the rim, crouched like a giant spider. Up close, I could see the family resemblance, the shape of the skull, the way it held its shoulders. This thing had been human once, had been Cherokee, like me. Grandfather, I said, surprised that my voice didn't shake. It tilted its head, and for a moment the terrible hunger in its eyes flickered into something else. Recognition, maybe. Or hope. You came, it whispered. I knew you would. The blood calls to blood. I came to help you find peace. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Peace, child. I haven't known peace since the white soldiers destroyed our world. There is only hunger now. Only the empty place that can never be filled. It can be filled, I said. Not with flesh, but with forgiveness. The ritual can set you free. Free? It stood up to its full height, at least 12 feet tall, with arms that nearly reached the ground. I am already free. Free to take what I need, when I need it. Join me, great-great-granddaughter. Let me share the gift of eternal hunger. I started the ritual, lighting the sacred tobacco and beginning the old prayers. The creature watched with those terrible yellow eyes, but didn't try to stop me. At first. As the prayers continued, something changed. The creature began to shriek, doubling over in pain. The hunger that had sustained it for over a century was being challenged, and it fought back like a living thing. "Stop," it begged. "You don't understand what you're doing." But I did understand. The hunger was a parasite, feeding on his guilt and shame over what he'd done during the Trail of Tears. The ritual wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about acceptance. Accepting what had been done and letting it go. The creature lunged at me, claws extended. I dropped to the ground and rolled aside, continuing the prayers, even as it swiped at me with those razor-sharp talons. "I had to eat them," it screamed. "My family was dying. My children were starving. What else could I do?" "You could have died with them," I said, still praying. "You could have chosen death over dishonor. And let them die for nothing?" The creature's voice cracked, and for a moment I heard the man it had once been, a desperate father trying to save his family. I thought if I could keep some of us alive, their deaths would have meaning. Their deaths already had meaning, I told it. They died as Cherokee, true to their beliefs, but you turned their sacrifice into something ugly. The creature collapsed, shrinking in on itself. The terrible hunger in its eyes was fading, replaced by a pain so deep it made me want to look away. "I know," it whispered. "I've known for 137 years, but the hunger won't let me stop. It feeds on the guilt, grows stronger every time I try to resist." "Then stop resisting," I said. "Accept what you did. Accept the consequences. Let the guilt go." I finished the ritual as the sun rose over the mountains. The creature lay curled up at my feet, no longer the terrible monster that had haunted these hills for over a century, just an old man, tired and ready to rest. "Thank you," my great-great-grandfather whispered as he began to fade. "Thank you for letting me come home." He was gone before the echo of his words died away. I spent 3 days at the ranger station, slowly recovering from the ritual. The hunger that had been eating at me was gone, and I could eat normally. Again. Max perked up too, though he stayed close to my side for weeks afterward. When the roads finally cleared, the authorities came to investigate the deaths. I told them the families had been trapped by the storm and starved before help could reach them. It wasn't exactly a lie. They had starved, just not in the way anyone would believe. The bodies were buried in the little cemetery near Gatlinburg. I attended every funeral, though I couldn't explain to the families why their loved ones had really died. The Park Service offered me a transfer after what had happened. Too many deaths, they said. Too traumatic for one person to handle. I accepted, but not for the reasons they thought. I couldn't stay in those mountains anymore. Not because of the trauma, but because of what the ritual had cost me. To call my great-great-grandfather's spirit back to the living world long enough for him to find peace, I'd had to give up something in return. Part of my own life force. Part of my own time. The doctor said I'd aged about 10 years during those 3 days. My hair had gone gray at the temples, and lines had appeared around my eyes that hadn't been there before. I felt older too, like I was carrying the weight of all those deaths. But it was worth it. The families could rest in peace now, and the hunger that had plagued these mountains for over a century was finally gone. I moved to Arizona, where the desert sun could burn away the memory of cold mountain nights. I never worked another winter assignment. Every year when the snow started falling, I'd pack up and head south until spring came. Max lived to be 16, old for a German shepherd. When he died, I buried him with a sage bundle and said the old Cherokee prayers over his grave. He'd earned his peace too. I retired early at 55, spent my time writing down the stories my great-grandfather had told me, trying to preserve what was left of the old ways. Some stories are meant to be remembered, even the dark ones. Especially the dark ones. Sometimes, on clear winter nights, I still dream about White Oak Sink. In my dreams, I can hear the wind whistling through those deep caves, and sometimes it sounds almost like singing. Cherokee voices carried on the mountain air, telling stories of the time before the world changed. But I never hear the hunger anymore. That terrible, endless appetite has finally been satisfied. The mountains remember everything, my great-grandfather used to say. They remember the Cherokee who lived there for thousands of years, and they remember the pain of being torn away from the land they loved. They remember the families who died on the Trail of Tears, and they remember those who came back, changed by suffering into something no longer human. But mountains can also forgive. They can let the dead rest and allow the living to heal. I know this because I've seen it happen. I helped make it happen. The hunger is gone from the Great Smoky Mountains, but I'll always carry a piece of it with me. Not the terrible craving that consumed my great-great-grandfather, but the memory of what happens when we forget who we're supposed to be. Some lessons are worth the price we pay to learn them, even when that price is everything we have. My name is Constance Brightwater, but everyone calls me Connie. I've been a park ranger in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest for 8 years now, ever since 1968. Back then, not many women wore the ranger uniform, but I needed this job more than I needed people's approval. The mountains don't care if you're a man or woman. They only care if you respect them. March 1976 brought an early thaw to Grandfather Mountain. Ice melted from the high peaks, sending cold water rushing down into the hollows where mountain families had lived for generations. Some of these families hadn't seen outsiders for months. That's how I liked it. The quiet, the distance from town, the feeling that I was protecting something pure. I specialized in family safety and children's programs. Maybe it was because I couldn't have kids of my own. 3 miscarriages and 2 stillbirths had ended my marriage and left me with arms that ached to hold something small and precious. So I channeled all that love into keeping other people's children safe. The mountains were full of old stories, granny witches who could cure anything with the right herbs, spirits that watched over families, ghost lights that led travelers to safety. I never believed much in that folklore. Mountain witches were just midwives using herbal medicine, I always said. Nothing supernatural about knowing which plants help with fever or pain. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Sarah Beth McKenzie, age 7, had shown up at the ranger station with bruises on her arms that looked like finger marks. She wouldn't say much, just that her daddy got mad when he drank. This wasn't the first report we'd gotten about Bill McKenzie, but mountain families protected their own, even when their own were hurting them. I drove up the winding dirt road to the McKenzie place, my Jeep bouncing over bits that hadn't been fixed in years. The cabin sat in a hollow so deep that morning sun barely touched the front porch. Everything felt wrong the moment I stepped out of my vehicle. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Bill McKenzie met me at the door. He was a big man with hands like ham hocks and eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. "Ranger Brightwater," he said, his voice friendly enough. "What brings you up this way?" "Just checking on Sarah Beth," I said, "making sure everyone's doing okay after the hard winter." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Kids bruise easy, you know, always falling down, getting into things." Behind him I could see Sarah Beth peeking around the corner. She had her mother's pretty blonde hair, but her eyes looked older than 7. When she saw me, she raised one small hand and waved, then disappeared back into the shadows. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the McKenzie place bothered me, though I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was how quiet Sarah Beth had been, or how her mother, Lucy, barely spoke at all. Maybe it was the way the forest itself seemed to be watching. I got up around 3 in the morning and made coffee, sitting at my kitchen table with case files spread out before me. Sarah Beth's wasn't the only troubling report I'd gotten lately. There was Tommy Garrett, age 9, whose teacher said he flinched every time an adult moved too fast, and little Emma Cole, only 5, who had started wetting herself at school. All mountain children, all with fathers who drank too much and mothers who looked scared. As I sat there in the lamplight studying the reports, I started noticing something strange. Over the past 2 years, 3 fathers from these same mountain families had died in accidents. Hunting mishaps, falls from cliffs, a snake bee, ice that turned septic before help could arrive. The deaths all happened in March, right around the time the mountain laurel started to bloom. The first thing I learned about investigating mountain families is that nobody talks to outsiders. The second thing is that the mountains have their own way of solving problems. Bill Mackenzie died on a Thursday. The call came from Lucy Mackenzie herself, her voice shaky over the radio. "Ranger Brightwater? There's been an accident. Bill was checking his traps up on Cedar Ridge and I think he fell." I found him at the bottom of a 30-foot drop, his neck twisted at an angle that made my stomach turn. The strange thing was his position. He lay perfectly centered in a circle of white stones that had been there since before anyone could remember. Local folklore said it was a fairy ring, a place where the old spirits gathered. "He must have slipped on the wet rocks," Sheriff Tom Bradley said when he arrived. "Been raining all week." But I'd climbed those same rocks just 2 days earlier, checking for winter damage. They were rough granite, the kind that gives you good grip even when wet. And Bill Mackenzie had been walking these mountains since he was old enough to hold a rifle. He knew every rock, every root, every loose stone. "Any witnesses?" I asked. Sheriff Bradley shook his head. "Lucy found him around noon when he didn't come back for dinner. Said she heard him leave before dawn like always." As we waited for the coroner, I walked the area. Bill's rifle lay 20 feet away, unfired. His trap bag sat beside the path, still full of bait. Nothing was disturbed except for a circle of crushed wildflowers around the stone ring, as if something large had been moving through them. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were small, like a woman's, but bare, and there were too many of them, leading from different directions toward the stone circle. They all stopped at the edge of the ring, as if whatever had made them couldn't or wouldn't cross the line of white stones. "Sheriff," I called, "you might want to see this." But when he came over, the prints were gone, just smooth mud and scattered leaves, as if the earth had swallowed the evidence. That evening, I drove back to check on Lucy and Sarah Beth. The cabin felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a heavy blanket had been lifted from the rooms. Sarah Beth was actually laughing, playing with a doll on the front porch. "He's gone," she said when she saw me, her 7-year-old voice matter of fact. "The mountain mothers took him away." "What did you say, honey?" But Lucy Mackenzie appeared in the doorway, pulling Sarah Beth inside with gentle but firm hands. "She's just confused about her daddy," Lucy said. "Kids say strange things when they're grieving." Except Sarah Beth didn't look like she was grieving. She looked free. That night I sat at my kitchen table again, adding Bill Mackenzie's name to my growing list. 4 fathers, all dead in March, all from families where children showed signs of abuse. The pattern was too clear to ignore, but too impossible to believe. I decided to visit Granny Opal. Opal Hensley lived higher up the mountain than anyone else, in a cabin her great-grandfather had built with his own hands. People said she was 100 years old, but she moved like a woman half that age. More importantly, she delivered babies, treated sickness, and knew every family secret in a 50-mile radius. Her cabin smelled like dried herbs and wood smoke. Bundles of plants hung from every rafter, and jars full of mysterious powders lined the shelves. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes blue as winter sky. "I've been expecting you," she said before I could knock. She poured me tea that tasted like pine needles and honey. We sat in her kitchen, sunlight streaming through windows lined with bottles of colored glass. "You want to ask me about the deaths," she said. "How did you?" "Child, I've been watching these mountains for nigh on 90 years. I know when someone's asking questions that need answering." She sipped her tea. "Bill Mackenzie won't be missed. Granny Opal, I have to investigate any suspicious death. That's my job." Her blue eyes studied me with an intensity that made me feel like she was looking right through to my bones. "Your job is protecting children. Question is, what happens when the law can't do that job?" "What do you mean?" "Some men, they're poison to their own families, beat their wives, hurt their babies, and the law just talks and talks while children suffer." She set down her cup. "But the mountains remember every child's tears, and some things older than law won't let evil go unpunished." Are you talking about the mountain mothers? Granny Opal smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. You know that story? Sarah Beth mentioned them. Course she did. Children see things clearer than grown folks. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the forest. Long time ago, women died protecting their babies from men who should have loved them. Their spirits never left these mountains. They watch over every child, waiting for the ones who need help. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. That's just folklore. Is it? She turned back to me. Tell me something, Ranger Brightwater. Why'd you really come to these mountains? What are you running from? The question hit me like a physical blow. Images flashed through my mind, my stepfather's heavy footsteps on the stairs, my mother's bruised face, the closet where I hid when the yelling started. I don't know what you mean. The mountain mothers know, Granny Opal said softly. They recognize their own. They've been watching you since the day you arrived, child. Watching and waiting to see what kind of woman you'd become. That night I dreamed of women in long dresses walking through the forest, their faces pale as moonlight and their eyes full of ancient sadness. They carried children in their arms, whispering lullabies that sounded like wind through pine trees. I woke up knowing that Bill Mackenzie was just the beginning. The second death happened 3 days later. Roy Garrett was found at the bottom of Eagle's Nest Falls, a popular spot where families brought kids to swim in the summer. But it was still too cold for swimming, and Roy had no reason to be there alone at night. Must have been drunk, Sheriff Bradley said, though the autopsy showed no alcohol in Roy's blood. Slipped on the wet rocks. I knew better now. I hiked to the falls and found the same impossible evidence. Bare footprints leading to the water's edge, too many to count, all women's sizes, but with no women around for miles. They circled the pool where Roy had drowned, as if whatever made them had been dancing. Tommy Garrett, Roy's 9-year-old son, met me at their cabin door. He had a black eye that was just starting to fade and bruises on his arms that matched the pattern of adult fingers. He can't hurt me anymore, Tommy said, his voice steady for such a small boy. The ladies promised. What ladies, Tommy? The ones who come at night. They smell like flowers and old wood, and they tell me stories about brave children who lived through scary times. He looked up at me with eyes too old for his face. They said you know about scary times, too. My hands were shaking. I didn't know why. Tommy's mother, Janet, appeared behind him. She looked different than I remembered. Younger somehow, as if years of fear had been lifted from her shoulders. Tommy, go inside and start your homework, she said gently. When he was gone, she turned to me. I know how this looks, but I loved Roy. I really did. When we first met, he was kind and funny and gentle with Tommy. But the drinking changed him, made him into someone else. Did you report the abuse? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. To who? Sheriff Bradley? And he and Roy went to school together. Used to say boys would be boys, that a man had a right to discipline his family how he saw fit. Her voice got quieter. Last week, Roy hit Tommy so hard the boy couldn't hear out of his left ear for 2 days. I was planning to take Tommy and leave, but I didn't know where to go. And now? Now Tommy sleeps through the night for the first time in 3 years. He smiles. He plays. He's not afraid every minute of every day. She looked at me directly. Whatever happened to Roy, it wasn't an accident. And I'm not sorry. That evening, I drove to 3 more cabins, checking on families with children. The pattern was always the same. Fathers who ruled with fists and fear, mothers who lived in terror, children who flinched at sudden movements. But in each house where a father had died, the atmosphere was completely different. Lighter, safer, free. I was starting to understand that the mountain mothers weren't just folklore. They were something real, something that had been protecting children for generations. And somehow, they thought I was one of them. The third death happened on Sunday morning. Carl Whitman was found in his barn, apparently trampled by his own horse. But Carl had raised horses his whole life, and his mare Bessie was known throughout the county for her gentle nature. Finding Carl's body crushed under Bessie's hooves made no sense at all. What made even less sense was that Bessie seemed terrified of something I couldn't see. She stood in the far corner of her stall, trembling and rolling her eyes white. When I tried to approach, she reared up and made sounds I'd never heard a horse make before, like she was screaming. "Easy, girl," I whispered, but my own voice was shaking. That's when I felt them. It started as a whisper in my mind, soft as summer rain. Then came the sensation of being watched, not by one presence, but by many. The temperature in the barn dropped 20 degrees in seconds, and my breath began to fog. I turned around slowly. They stood in the doorway, 3 women in long, faded dresses that might have been white once but now looked gray as morning mist. Their faces were pale and beautiful, but their eyes held depths of sorrow that made my heart ache. One carried a baby in her arms. Another held the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 5. The children looked real, solid. The women looked like they were made of moonlight and memory. "Don't be afraid," one of them said, though I couldn't tell which one spoke. The voice came from everywhere at once, echoing in my bones. "We've been waiting for you to see us." "I'm not afraid," I lied, because admitting fear felt like betraying something important. "Yes, you are. You've been afraid since you were 7 years old, hiding in your closet while your stepfather hurt your mother." The woman holding the baby stepped closer. "We know, child. We remember every frightened heartbeat, every prayer for protection that seemed to go unanswered." My legs gave out. I sat down hard on a hay bale, staring at these impossible beings who knew my deepest secrets. "But your prayers were answered," the second woman said. "Who do you think made your stepfather's truck skid off the road that winter night? Who do you think ensured he hit that tree just hard enough to scare him but not kill him? Sometimes justice comes slowly, but it always comes." I remembered that night. I was 12, and my stepfather had just given my mother 2 black eyes and a broken rib. I'd prayed harder than I'd ever prayed for anything, begging God or anyone who would listen to make him stop hurting us. 3 days later, he wrapped his truck around an oak tree, broke both his legs, and spent 6 months in the hospital. When he came home, he was different, quieter, gentler, like something had scared the meanness right out of him. "You're the mountain mothers," I whispered. "We are mothers who died protecting our children," the third woman, Anne said. "We are women who lived in fear and pain, who suffered in silence while the law looked away. We are every mother's love made manifest, every prayer for protection given form." The baby in the first woman's arms started to fuss, and she rocked him gently, humming a lullaby that made me want to cry. "Carl Whitman beat his daughter with a belt buckle," she continued. "Left marks on her back that may never heal. We asked him to stop, visited him in his dreams, showed him what his cruelty was doing to his child's spirit. He laughed and hurt her worse. So you killed him." "We gave him a choice," the woman said. "Stop hurting his daughter or face the consequences. He chose to ignore our warning." I thought about Carl's 5-year-old daughter, Emma, who had started wetting herself at school. About the fear in her eyes when anyone spoke too loudly. "The law was supposed to protect her," I said. "The law failed her, just like it failed you. Just like it fails so many children." The second woman knelt down beside me, and I could smell wildflowers and rain. "That's why we need someone who can walk in both worlds. Someone who understands the law, but also understands that some things are more important than law." "What are you asking me to do?" "Help us protect the children who have no other protection. Be our voice in your world, our hands when spirits cannot touch what needs touching." I looked around the barn at the evidence of Carl Whitman's violent death and tried to make sense of what they were offering. "There's another one," I said suddenly. "Another man who hurts children." The 3 women nodded. "We know," they said in unison, "and he has been warned." The man was Jack Morrison, the maintenance worker at our ranger station. He'd worked there for 15 years, longer than I had, and everyone liked him. He was friendly, helpful, always volunteering to fix things at the local school or help families with repairs they couldn't afford. But I'd started noticing things, how children got quiet when Jack was around, how some of the younger kids would find excuses to leave when he showed up, how he always seemed to know which families had fathers who traveled for work, leaving mothers and children alone. The mountain mothers had given me new eyes to see with, and what I saw made me sick. I started watching Jack more carefully, following him when he made his rounds, checking up on his helpful visits to struggling families. It didn't take long to confirm what I already suspected. Jack Morrison was a predator, and he'd been using his position and reputation to hurt children for years. The proof came from an unexpected source, 8-year-old Katie Henderson, whose father worked for the railroad and was gone 3 weeks out of every month. Katie's mother, Beth, had mentioned how grateful she was for Jack's help fixing their roof and plumbing. I found Katie sitting alone by the creek that ran behind the ranger station, throwing rocks at the water with the kind of anger that doesn't belong on a child's face. "Hey there, Katie," I said, settling down on the grass beside her. "Everything okay?" She looked at me with eyes that reminded me of Sarah Beth Mackenzie, of Tommy Garrett, of Emma Cole. Eyes that had seen things no child should see. "The nice ladies told me I could trust you," she said finally. "What nice ladies?" "The ones in the pretty dresses. They come to my room sometimes when I'm scared. They said you'd understand because scary things happened to you too when you were little." My heart started pounding. "Katie, did someone hurt you?" She nodded, still throwing rocks. "Mr. Jack comes to help Mama when Daddy's gone. He fixes things and brings groceries, and Mama thinks he's real nice. But when Mama's busy or goes to the store..." She trailed off. "What does Mr. Jack do when your Mama's not around?" Katie told me things that made me want to be sick. Things that Jack Morrison had been doing to her for months, Al. Ways when her mother wasn't home. Always with threats about what would happen to her family if she told anyone. "But the nice ladies said I should tell you," Katie finished. "They said you'd..." "Make him stop." "Katie, we need to tell your mama. And the sheriff. Mr. Jack needs to be arrested." She shook her head violently. "He said if I told, bad things would happen to Mama and Daddy. He said he had friends who would hurt them." I knew she was right to be afraid. Jack Morrison was well-connected, well-liked, and had been part of this community for 15 years. People would believe him over an 8-year-old girl, especially since there was no physical evidence. But the mountain mothers didn't need evidence. They needed only the truth, and they had ways of dealing with truth that the law couldn't touch. That night, I sat in my kitchen with all the case files spread out before me. Bill Mackenzie, Roy Garrett, Carl Whitman, all dead within 2 weeks, all child abusers who had ignored warnings and paid the ultimate price. Now Jack Morrison would get his warning. I didn't have to wait long to see it happen. Jack started having accidents immediately. Small ones at first, tools that slipped and cut his hands, ladders that tilted just enough to make him fall, electrical outlets that shocked him when he tried to fix them. Nothing serious enough to kill, but enough to get his attention. Then came the dreams. I could tell by looking at him that Jack wasn't sleeping well. He had bags under his eyes and his hands shook when he thought nobody was looking. Twice I caught him staring off into space during staff meetings, his face pale and sweaty. "You okay, Jack?" I asked one morning when he nearly dropped a box of supplies. Fine, he said quickly. "Just tired. Haven't been sleeping great lately." But he wasn't fine. Whatever the mountain mothers were showing him in his dreams was eating away at him from the inside. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I was working late finishing paperwork when I heard voices outside. Jack was in the parking lot talking to someone I couldn't see. "I didn't do anything wrong," he was saying, his voice high and panicked. "It was just games. Kids like games." I moved to the window and looked out. Jack stood alone in the empty parking lot, gesturing wildly at the air. But as I watched, the air began to shimmer like heat waves, and I could make out the faint outlines of 3 women in long dresses. "You have until tomorrow night," one of them said, her voice carrying clearly through the glass. "Stop hurting children, or join the others who made the same choice." "You can't do this," Jack screamed. I have rights. There are laws. There are older laws than yours, another voice replied. Laws written in tears and blood, in every mother's prayer for her child's safety. You have ignored those laws long enough. The shimmering air grew brighter, and for a moment I could see them clearly. 3 women whose faces held all the love and fury of mothers throughout time. Then they were gone, leaving Jack Morrison alone and trembling in the parking lot. I watched him stumble to his truck and drive away, weaving slightly on the mountain road. He had less than 24 hours to make his choice. They found Jack Morrison's body on Sunday morning, electrocuted in his own garage while trying to fix a broken power tool. The official cause was accidental death due to faulty wiring, but I knew better. I also knew it was the right ending. Katie Henderson started laughing again. Her mother noticed the change and asked me what I thought might have caused it. Sometimes children just need to feel safe, I told her, which was the truest thing I could say. Sheriff Bradley closed the case file without much investigation. 4 accidental deaths in 1 month was unusual, but accidents happened in the mountains. People got careless, made mistakes, had bad luck. He never found the pattern I'd found, never connect. The dots between dead fathers and abused children. Maybe he didn't want to see it. Maybe some truths are too big for small-town sheriffs to handle. But I saw it, and I understood what the mountain mothers were asking of me. I put in for a transfer to social services the following month, specializing in child abuse cases throughout Appalachian communities. My official job is to investigate reports, gather evidence, and work within the legal system to protect children. My unofficial job is to be the bridge between 2 kinds of justice. Most cases I can handle through proper channels. Good social workers, understanding judges, communities that rally around threatened children. The system works more often than people think, especially when someone fights hard enough to make it work. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the system fails. Sometimes there are men like Bill McKenzie and Roy Garrett and Carl Whitman and Jack Morrison who hurt children and hide behind good reputations and legal technicalities and a justice system that moves too slowly for small victims who can't wait. When that happens, I know what to do. I visit Granny Opal, who always has tea ready and never seems surprised to see me. We talk about herbs and healing, about old stories and older truths. And sometimes, when the moon is dark and the mountain laurel blooms, I walk alone through the forest paths and leave certain information where the right spirits can find it. Names, addresses, proof of crimes that courts might never prosecute. The mountain mothers handle the rest. I've been doing this work for 2 years now, and I sleep better than I have since childhood. Not because I've found peace with the violence in my past, but because I've found purpose for it. Every child I save, every monster I help remove from the world, feels like retroactive protection for the scared little girl I used to be. People ask me if I believe in ghosts, in spirits, in things that can't be explained by science or law. I tell them I believe in justice, in protection for those who can't protect themselves. In love that's stronger than death. I believe in mothers who love their children enough to come back from the grave. Last week I got a call about a new case. 5-year-old boy, suspicious bruises, father with a drinking problem, and a history of violence. Same old story, same heartbreaking pattern. But when I arrived at the cabin, I noticed something that made me smile. Wildflowers grew in a perfect circle around the front porch, and the air smelled like rain and old wood and something deeper, something like love made manifest. The mountain mothers were already watching, already waiting, already protecting. My name is Constance Brightwater, and I've learned that some kinds of justice don't need judges or juries or laws written in books. Sometimes justice just needs mothers who love their children enough to never stop fighting for them, even after death. The mountains remember everything, and some loves are too strong to die. My name is Jerry Stormwind, and I've been a park ranger for 22 years. I've seen bear attacks, lost hikers, and people doing stupid things in the woods. But nothing prepared me for what happened at the old Cherokee Stones in October of 1991. I worked the Chattahoochee National Forest up in North Georgia near Brasstown Bald. It's beautiful country, rolling hills covered in oak and pine, streams that run clear as glass, and old paths that the Cherokee walked for hundreds of years before they got forced out in 1838. My grandmother was Cherokee, not full blood, but enough that she taught me the old words and stories before she died. Most folks don't know about my heritage. With my light eyes and weathered skin, I just look like another mountain man. But I carry a small medicine bag she gave me hidden under my uniform shirt. The sacred sites are my specialty. There are dozens of them scattered through these mountains: stone circles, burial mounds, old ceremony grounds. The Cherokee built them to last, and they've been here for over 1,000 years. My job is keeping treasure hunters and amateur archaeologists from messing with them. That's what I was doing on October 15th when the call came in. "Jerry, we got a problem up at the Brasstown site," my supervisor Dave said over the radio. "Some university folks went up there 3 days ago to do research. They were supposed to check in yesterday, but nobody's heard from them." The Brasstown site is one of the most important Cherokee places in Georgia. It's got a perfect stone circle, 3 burial mounds, and acoustics that'll make your voice carry for miles. It's also protected by law. Nobody's supposed to dig there without permits that take years to get. "Did they have permission?" I asked. "That's the thing. Dr. Patricia Vance from the university said they were just doing surface surveys. No digging. But the Trib Mayutives. Our council called this morning saying something's wrong up there." The tribal council doesn't call about nothing. These are people who remember the old stories, the ones my grandmother used to tell about spirits in the stones that protect sacred ground. I loaded my truck and drove the Forest Service road as far as it goes, then hiked the last 2 miles on foot. The trail winds through thick woods, past streams and rock formations that have names in Cherokee I can barely pronounce. As I got closer to the site, I noticed something strange. The woods were too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even my boots seemed to make too much noise on the fallen leaves. Then I smelled it. That electric smell you get right before lightning strikes. The sacred site sits in a natural clearing on top of a ridge. The stone circle is about 30 feet across, made of granite blocks that must weigh 2 tons each. The Cherokee didn't use metal tools or wheels when they built this. They moved those stones with ropes and wooden rollers and more patience than most people have today. But when I came out of the trees, I knew something was terribly wrong. 3 of the stones had been moved, not just shifted, completely relocated, with fresh gouges in the earth showing where they'd been dragged. One of the burial mounds had a gaping hole in its side, dirt piled everywhere. Surveying equipment sat abandoned around the site, but no sign of Dr. Vance or her team. The wrongness of it hit me like a physical blow. These stones had stood in perfect alignment for centuries, marking the path of stars and seasons. Moving them was like ripping pages out of a Bible. I called out, "Hello, Dr. Vance, anyone here?" My voice echoed strangely, bouncing off the remaining stones with a hollow sound I'd never heard before. Usually the acoustics here are perfect. You can whisper on one side of the circle and be heard clearly on the other. Now it sounded broken, fractured. I found their tents still set up in the trees, sleeping bags undisturbed. 5 coffee cups sat around a cold fire pit, half full. Personal items were scattered everywhere, wallets, car keys, cell phones, but no people. Then I saw the tools. The metal excavation equipment lay twisted and melted near the destroyed burial mound. Shovels bent into impossible shapes, a metal detector fused with granite like it had been hit by lightning. The damage looked fresh, but there hadn't been storms for weeks. I picked up one of the cell phones and tried to call for backup. Dead. Not just the battery. The whole phone felt wrong in my hands, like the metal was slightly warm and the plastic had gone soft. That's when I heard it. A low, humming sound, almost below the range of hearing. It seemed to come from the stones themselves, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. The Cherokee have a word for it, Nundasunyi, the sound rocks make when they remember. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. The stones sing when the old spirits wake up. When someone bothers, what should be left alone? I'd always thought it was just a story. The humming got louder as the sun started to set, turning the granite blocks into dark silhouettes against the orange sky. I should have left right then, should have hiked back to my truck and called for a full search team. But those missing people were my responsibility. Besides, I was Cherokee. This was my sacred ground too, even if I'd never felt worthy of it before. As darkness fell, the stones began to sing. The song wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It started as that low humming like power lines in the wind, but as full dark settled over the mountain, it changed into something that made my Cherokee blood run cold. It was voices, human voices, singing in the old language. I knew enough Cherokee words to catch pieces of it, something about protection, something about anger, and underneath it all the word Tsuni-hi-yi, the walking spirits. My radio crackled with static. "Jerry, you copy? What's your status up there?" I tried to answer, but the only sound that came out was electronic squealing. Every piece of modern equipment was failing, like the mountain itself was rejecting anything that didn't belong. I set up my sleeping bag near the tree line, far from the stone circle but close enough to keep watch. The singing continued all night, rising and falling like a conversation between the scattered stones. Sometimes it sounded mournful, like mourning songs. Other times it carried an edge of rage that made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep much. Morning brought silence, but not the peaceful kind. The wrongness was stronger now, pressing down on the clearing like a weight. Even the air felt thick and hard to breathe. I started my search at first light, looking for any sign of where the research team might have gone. Their equipment was still scattered around, and I found notebooks with detailed measurements of the stone circle. Dr. Vance had been studying the astronomical alignments, how the stones marked the movement of stars and seasons. One page caught my attention. In her neat handwriting, local Cherokee elder warns against disturbing burial mound, says site protected by stone spirits from 1838. Obvious folklore to prevent archaeological study. The date on that note was October 12th, 3 days ago. I found footprints leading away from the camp, 5 sets heading toward the burial mounds. The tracks were clear in the soft earth, work boots, sneakers, hiking shoes, but they just stopped at the edge of the damaged mound, like the people had vanished into thin air. That's when I saw the first piece of clothing. A red flannel shirt hung from a tree branch about 20 feet from the burial mound. It was shredded, not torn, shredded like it had been caught in machinery with precise cuts that left the fabric in ribbons. No blood, no struggle, just cloth hanging like a flag of surrender. I found more pieces scattered through the woods, a hiking boot with the laces still tied, jeans with the belt still threaded through the loops, all of it shredded the same way, all of it empty. By noon, I'd collected enough clothing to account for 5 people, but no bodies, no bones, no signs of any struggle except those perfectly destroyed clothes and the melted excavation tools. The Cherokee elder's warning kept echoing in my mind. Stone spirits, protection from 1838. That was the year of the removal, when the U.S. Army forced the Cherokee to leave Georgia and march to Oklahoma. Thousands died on what we call the Trail of Tears. But what happened to the people who tried to hide in these mountains? I was thinking about that when the ground started to shake. It wasn't an earthquake. I'd felt those before. This was different, more focused. The vibrations seemed to pulse up from deep underground, making the remaining stones in the circle rock slightly on their bases. Then, one of the displaced stones moved. I watched it happen. The 2-ton granite block, lying on its side 30 feet from where it belonged, slowly rolled upright. No machinery, no human hands. It just moved, grinding against the earth with a sound like breaking bones. I ran. I made it maybe 50 yards before I realized how stupid that was. Where was I going to go? This was my forest, my responsibility, and those missing people might still be alive somewhere. When I stopped running, the stone had settled back into its original position in the circle. The fresh gouges in the earth were gone, filled in with dirt and fallen leaves like they'd never existed. The burial mound looked different too. The gaping hole in its side was smaller, partially filled with earth and stones, like something was trying to heal itself. I approached the stone circle carefully, every nerve on edge. The humming was back, so low I felt it more than heard it. As I got closer, I could make out individual voices in T, a Cherokee song. My grandmother had taught me the names of the old spirits. Nun-ne-hi for the immortal ones, Tsu-ni-hi-yi for those who walk between worlds. According to the stories, some Cherokee warriors and medicine men chose to bind their spirits to sacred places rather than abandon them during the removal. They became guardians, protectors of the old ways. Standing at the edge of the stone circle, I finally understood what I was dealing with. The research team hadn't just disturbed an archaeological site. They'd awakened something that had been sleeping for over 150 years, something that remembered the Trail of Tears, something that would not let the sacred ground be desecrated again. The sun was setting, and the stones were beginning to sing louder. But this time, I didn't run. I was Cherokee too, even if I'd never felt it strongly before. These spirits were my ancestors, my people. I stepped into the circle. The moment my boots touched the sacred ground inside the stones, the world changed. The vision hit me like a lightning bolt. I was standing in the same stone circle, but it was 1838. Cherokee families filled the clearing. Men, women, children, all dressed in traditional clothes mixed with white man's clothing. They were performing a ceremony, chanting and dancing around a sacred fire in the center of the stone ring. But soldiers were coming up the mountain. I could hear their boots and horses, their shouts in English. The Cherokee knew they were coming too. The ceremony was rushed, desperate, unfinished. An old medicine man stood in the center of the circle, his hands raised to the sky. He was speaking in rapid Cherokee, words I didn't understand, but felt in my bones. He was binding something, weaving a protection that would last beyond his own life. The soldiers burst into the clearing just as he completed the ritual. Gunshots, screams. The medicine man fell, his blood soaking into the earth at the center of the stone circle. But his spirit didn't die. I saw it happen, a shimmering form rising from his body, then sinking into the stones themselves. Other Cherokee spirits followed, warriors and elders choosing to become one with the sacred ground rather than abandon it. The vision ended, and I was back in 1991, gasping for breath inside the stone circle. But I wasn't alone anymore. They stood between the granite blocks, translucent figures in Cherokee clothing, their eyes burning with a light that hurt to look at. 5 of them, maybe 6, all watching me with expressions of suspicion and rage. The center figure spoke in Cherokee. My grandmother's lessons weren't good enough to understand all of it, but I caught the important parts. Tlakwohiyu. Who are you? Tsiyi. Jerry Stormwind, I answered in Cherokee, proud that my voice didn't shake. Aniyiv wiyani. Anitsalagi. I am Cherokee. The spirit laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yuna? Yuga. Really? White man. He was right. I looked white, talked white, worked for the white man's government, but I pulled out my grandmother's medicine bag and held it up. Elisi a nitsa lagi, anidoda jivi wiyuhi. My grandmother Cherokee. I protect sacred places. The spirits moved closer, circling me inside the stone ring. Up close, I could see how they'd died. Bullet wounds, blade cuts, the violence of the removal. But their wounds glowed with that same burning light, like stars in the darkness. The leader pointed past me toward the damaged burial mound. Gadotsuhini, Sudini. They destroyed. Where are they? He meant the research team, the 5 missing people who'd disturbed the sacred ground. Talahilu, I said. I don't know. The spirit's form became more solid, more threatening. Nigadi, Suhiyu. You lie. you know. Then I understood. The spirits thought I was part of it. Another white man come to desecrate Cherokee graves. They'd taken the research team, and they were planning to take me too. The temperature, in the circle dropped 20 degrees. Frost began forming on the grass at my feet, and my breath came out in white puffs. The other spirits pressed closer, their burning eyes fixed on me. I had maybe seconds before they decided I was a threat. "See we you he!" I shouted. "Wait." I started talking, mixing Cherokee and English, telling them everything I knew, about my job protecting sacred sites, about growing up with my grandmother's stories, about respecting the old ways even when I didn't fully understand them. The spirits listened, but their expressions didn't change. Finally, the leader held up his hand for silence. "Galu quo di you?" he asked. "What did you do?" I realized he wasn't asking about the research team. He was asking about me, about my whole life. What had I done to prove I was really Cherokee? What had I sacrificed for the old ways? The honest answer was, nothing. I'd taken the easy path, blending in with white society, using my heritage only when it was convenient for my job. I'd never stood up for Cherokee rights, never participated in ceremonies, never even visited the reservation in Oklahoma where my people had been forced to go. Tlaquohiu, I admitted. Nothing. The spirit leader nodded slowly. Yuganastaya, tsalagiga quohiyuga. You are white inside. Cherokee is nothing to you. He raised his hand, and the other spirits began to sing. Not the mournful song I'd heard before, but something harsh and angry. The stones around us started to glow with that same burning light, and the ground beneath my feet grew hot. This was how the research team had died. The spirits had called down the power of the sacred ground itself, burning away everything that didn't belong. But as the Cherokee death song rose around me, I heard something else. Another voice, singing a different tune. My grandmother's voice, as clear as if she were standing right beside me. She was singing the same protection song I'd heard the medicine man use in my vision. The words came flooding back from childhood memories, Cherokee lullabies and prayers. She'd taught me when I was too young to understand their power. I started singing with her, my voice cracking on the unfamiliar syllables. The spirits stopped their death song, staring at me in surprise. It was the same song their leader had died trying to complete in 1838, the protection ceremony that had bound their spirits to the stones. But it wasn't finished. After 153 years, it still wasn't finished. Tu, anitsa lagi nigadi wi yuhi, I sang. Cherokee, I will protect this place. The spirit leader stepped toward me, his burning eyes boring into mine. For a moment I thought he was going to strike me down anyway. Instead, he smiled. Ga nehe, tsis quo nihis daya. Come then, you must complete what was started. That's when I realized the research team was still alive, somewhere. And the only way to save them, and myself, was to finish a Cherokee ceremony that had been interrupted by genocide over a century ago. The spirit leader's name was Joseph Ridge, and he'd been the medicine man trying to protect the sacred ground when the soldiers came in 1838. He showed me everything in another vision. The panicked ceremony, the incomplete binding, the choice he and the other Cherokee spirits had made to stay and guard their sacred places. For 153 years, they'd been trapped between worlds, unable to rest because their protection ritual had never been completed. They'd grown angry, bitter, more dangerous with each passing decade. The research team had been the last straw. Ganets in Eliv, Ridge said, pointing toward the burial mound. Come and see. I followed his glowing form to the damaged mound. As we approached, the earth began to shift and move, revealing a hidden chamber underneath. The walls were lined with Cherokee graves, but these weren't the ancient burials the archaeologists had been looking for. These were fresh. Dr. Vance and her 4 team members lay in the traditional Cherokee burial position, surrounded by grave goods, pottery, jewelry, traditional Cherokee items that hadn't been made in over a century. They were alive but unconscious, breathing slowly like they were in a deep sleep. Tisi ni G duo SD, Ridge explained. We protect them until the ceremony ends. The spirits hadn't killed the researchers. They'd taken them into the sacred burial chamber to keep them safe from the incomplete binding that was tearing the site apart. But they couldn't release them until the protection ceremony was finished. And I was the only one who could do it. Ridge led me back to the stone circle. The other spirits had arranged themselves at specific points around the ring, corresponding to cardinal directions and celestial alignments. This wasn't just any Cherokee ceremony. It was one of the most sacred, designed to bind protective spirits to important sites forever. Hi a tis quoni yi, Ridge said, gesturing to the center of the circle. You must take his place. He meant I had to stand where the original medicine man had died, where his blood had soaked into the sacred ground. I had to complete what he'd started, using Cherokee words and rituals I barely remembered from my grandmother's teachings. The weight of it hit me. If I got this wrong, the incomplete binding would continue to deteriorate. The protective spirits would become more angry and dangerous, eventually destroying anyone who came near the sacred site. The research team would die, and probably me with them. But if I got it right, I'd be bound to this place forever, just like Ridge and the others. Part of my spirit would stay here, protecting Cherokee's sacred ground until the end of time. Gakwoni hi stayu hi, Ridge asked. Do you understand? I understood. This wasn't just about saving 5 lives, it was about choosing between my comfortable life as a park ranger and my responsibility to my Cherokee ancestors. Hoa, I said. Yes, the spirits began to sing, the same protection ceremony from my vision. But this time, they were singing for me, guiding me through the complex ritual that would complete their work from 1838. I stood in the center of the stone circle, on ground still stained with Cherokee blood. The words came from somewhere deeper than memory, from genetic memory, from the voices of ancestors I'd never known, but whose blood ran in my veins. The ceremony required tobacco, which I had in my grandmother's medicine bag. It required specific chants timed to the movement of stars, which the spirits helped me with. And it required sacrifice, not death, but transformation. As I sang the ancient Cherokee words, I felt my connection to the modern world beginning to fade. My radio went completely dead. My watch stopped ticking. Even my uniform began to feel strange against my skin, like it belonged to someone else. But my connection to the sacred ground grew stronger. I could feel the power flowing up through the earth, through the stones, through the centuries of Cherokee prayers and ceremonies that had sanctified this place. I could feel the spirits of my ancestors, not just Ridge and the others bound to the stones, but hundreds of Cherokee men and women who had walked this mountain, lived on this land, died defending it. The ceremony reached its climax as the constellation Orion reached its highest point in the sky. According to Cherokee tradition, that was when the spirit world was closest to our own. Ganehe, edudaditla quohiyu, I chanted. Come, do what must be done. Light exploded from the stone circle, brighter than daylight but somehow gentle on my eyes. The spirits of Ridge and the other Cherokee guardians became solid, real, more human than they'd appeared since 1838. Ridge placed his hands on my shoulders. Detsa du hayu, tsitsa lagi gata lisdaya. It is finished. You are truly Cherokee now. The binding was complete. The sacred site was protected, not jused, by angry spirits trapped between worlds, but by Cherokee guardians who had chosen their eternal duty willingly. The research team would wake up in their sleeping bags tomorrow morning with no memory of what had happened, convinced they'd been knocked unconscious by a gas leak from their camp stove. Their equipment would work again, but they'd find the site exactly as it should be. Stone circle intact, burial mounds undisturbed. They'd pack up and leave, writing it off as a failed expedition. But I would stay. Not physically. I'd go back to my ranger station, file my reports, continue protecting Cherokee sites throughout the forest. But part of me would always be here now, connected to this sacred ground in ways I'd never understood before. Ridge and the other spirits began to fade as dawn approached, finally able to rest after 153 years of duty. "Du hitsu," he said, before disappearing completely. "Thank you." I was alone in the stone circle, but I didn't feel alone. I felt connected to my ancestors, to the sacred land, to something larger than my individual life. For the first time since my grandmother died, I felt truly Cherokee. That was 34 years ago, and I'm still a park ranger. Still protecting Cherokee sites in the Chattahoochee National Forest, though most people don't understand what that really means. Dr. Vance and her team woke up the next morning with splitting headaches and no memory of disturbing the burial mound. Their equipment worked fine, but all their data from the sacred site had been mysteriously corrupted. They wrote it off as a technical failure and never came back. I helped them pack their gear and guided them back to their vehicles, playing the part of a concerned ranger checking on their welfare. They thanked me for my help and drove away, never suspecting that they'd spent 3 days in a Cherokee burial chamber. The official report stated that the research team had suffered carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty camp stove and had hallucinated the missing time. Case closed. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the years since, I've had dozens of encounters with Cherokee spirits at sacred sites throughout the mountains. Not angry ghosts trapped between worlds, but guardians who chose their duty willingly. They recognize me now, accept me as one of their own. I've learned to complete other interrupted ceremonies, to heal spiritual wounds left by the forced removal, to be the bridge between the Cherokee past and the present. My job title is still Park Ranger, but my real work is much older and more important. The sacred sites are safe now. Treasure hunters give up for no reason they can explain. Developers find their plans mysteriously delayed by bureaucratic complications. Tourists get lost on well-marked trails and decide to turn back. The land protects itself, with help from those of us who chose to be its guardians. My grandmother's medicine bag is worn smooth from 34 years of carrying, but it's never been more important to me. Sometimes, when I'm alone at one of the sacred sites, I can hear her voice in the wind, proud of the choice I made that night in the stone circle. I never married, never had children of my own, but I'm training 3 young Cherokee Rangers who've shown the right kind of respect for the old ways. When my time comes, they'll be ready to continue the work, because the work is never finished. There are still sacred sites that need healing, still interrupted ceremonies that need completion. The Cherokee were forcibly removed from Georgia in 1838, but our spirits never left. We're still here, still protecting the land our ancestors died for. People ask me sometimes why I chose to stay in the Forest Service instead of moving to the reservation, connecting with the larger Cherokee community. The answer is simple. This is where I'm needed. This is where my ancestors bound themselves to protect what's sacred. And every night, when the sun goes down, over the Appalachian Mountains, I can hear the stones singing. Not the angry, trapped song of spirits unable to rest, but the peaceful chant of guardians at their posts, protecting what cannot be replaced. The song says, "We're still here." The song says, "We remember." The song says, "The sacred ground will never be abandoned again." Sometimes, late at night when I'm making my rounds, I'll stop by the Brasstown site. The stone circle stands perfect and unbroken, aligned with stars that guided Cherokee ceremonies for over 1,000 years. The burial mounds are intact, protecting the bones of my ancestors. And if you know how to listen, you can still hear Joseph Ridge and the other guardians singing their protection songs, keeping watch over the sacred places until the end of time. I sing with them sometimes, adding my voice to the ancient harmony. My Cherokee isn't perfect, but it's heartfelt, and that's what matters. We are still here, we remember, and we will never let the sacred places be forgotten again. My name is Malcolm Creedmoor, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I started this job right after I came back from Vietnam in 1967 when I was 23 and needed somewhere quiet to put my head back together. The Allegheny Mountains in Pennsylvania seemed like the perfect place to hide from the world. Tonight is September 15th, 1983, and I'm walking my regular patrol through Cook Forest State Park. There's no moon, which makes the old hemlock trees look like giant black fingers reaching up to grab the stars. Some of these trees have been here for over 400 years. They were already ancient when my great-grandfather first came to America. I carry a flashlight, but I rarely use it. My eyes got good at seeing in the dark during the war. You learn to move quiet and see everything when your life depends on it. The forest sounds different at night. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves tells you a story, if you know how to listen. My patrol area covers about 6 square miles of the deepest part of the forest. If something goes wrong out here, backup is 45 minutes away on the winding forest roads. That's fine by me. I like being alone. People make me nervous these days, especially in groups. Too many memories of squads and ambushes and friends who didn't make it home. I wear a silver cross around my neck that the Army gave me after my unit got wiped out. I'm not particularly religious, but it reminds me that I survived when 12 other good men didn't. Sometimes I wonder why. The radio on my belt crackles to life. Ranger Creedmoor, this is dispatch. We've got a hunting party that missed their check-in time. Last known location was near Heart's Content area. Can you investigate? Copy that, I reply. Heading there now. Heart's Content is about 2 miles from my current position. It's a special place. Virgin forest that loggers never touched. The trees there are so tall and thick that even during the day it feels like being inside a dark cathedral. As I walk, I notice something strange. The forest is too quiet. Usually you hear owls hooting, mice rustling in the leaves, maybe a raccoon washing food by the creek. Tonight, nothing. Even the insects have gone silent. In Vietnam, we called this the Big Quiet. It meant predators were nearby. I reach the Heart's Content area and immediately smell something wrong. There's a thick, musky scent in the air, like a wet dog, but stronger and wilder. My combat instincts kick in and I crouch low, moving from tree to tree. Then I see the first body. The hunter is sprawled against a large hemlock, his rifle still in his hands. But something has torn his throat out. The wound is too big and too clean to be from any animal I know. Bears don't hunt in Pennsylvania anymore, and there haven't been wolves here for over 100 years. I find the other 3 hunters within a few minutes. All dead. All torn apart in the same way. Their expensive night vision scopes are smashed to pieces, like something deliberately destroyed them. The weird thing is their positions. They were spread out over almost 2 miles, but according to my watch, they all died within 10 minutes of each other. That's impossible unless whatever killed them moved faster than any animal should. I radio dispatch. I've got 4 bodies here, looks like animal attack, but send the state police and the coroner. This is going to be complicated. While I wait for backup, I study the tracks around the bodies. In the soft mud near the creek, I find paw prints, but they're wrong. They start out looking like wolf tracks, big ones, but then they seem to change shape. In one spot, they almost look like human footprints, but stretched and distorted. That's when I hear the howling. It starts about half a mile away, deep and mournful, like a wolf calling to its pack. But there's something else in the sound, something that makes the hair on my neck stand up. It almost sounds like it's trying to form words. The howling stops, and then I hear something that makes my blood freeze. An answer. Another howl, but this one comes from a different direction. Then another, and another. They're surrounding me. I've heard wolves before, on nature documentaries and in zoos. This is different. These howls have a planning to them, like soldiers coordinating an attack. I check my service pistol and make sure I have extra ammunition. Then I start walking back toward my truck, moving carefully and quietly like I learned in the jungle. Every shadow could hide death. Every sound could be the last thing I hear. Behind me, something large crashes through the underbrush. I don't look back. Looking back gets you killed. The next morning, the state police arrive with a wildlife expert from Penn State. Dr. Sarah Chen is a small woman with sharp eyes who studies predator behavior. She examines the bodies while I show the lead detective, Sergeant Murphy, around the scene. 17 years on the force, Murphy says, shaking his head as he looks at what's left of the hunters. Never seen anything like this. Dr. Chen calls us over to where she's studying the tracks. These prints are unusual, she says, frowning. The size suggests a wolf, but North American wolves don't get this big. And look at this. She points to where the tracks seem to change shape. It's like the animal's paws were shifting as it walked. Could it be a dog? Murphy asks. Maybe someone's got an illegal wolf hybrid? The bite patterns don't match any domestic breed, she replies, and the coordination required for this attack. Wolves are smart, but this level of tactical planning is almost human. I don't mention the howls I heard last night. They already think I'm the crazy Vietnam vet who lives alone in the woods. No need to give them more ammunition. That evening, I'm back on patrol. The forest feels different now. Leon. Something is watching me from every shadow. I've felt this before, in the jungle when Charlie was tracking us. The feeling that invisible eyes are measuring you, waiting for the right moment to strike. Around midnight, I'm checking the area near Sawmill Run when I hear voices. Human voices, speaking low and urgent. But they're coming from deep in the forest where no human should be at this time of night. I creep closer, using trees for cover. Territory is compromised, a man's voice says. Too much attention now. We should have been more careful with the hunters, another voice replies. Left less evidence. Evidence doesn't matter if there are no witnesses, a third voice growls. I peer around a massive oak tree and see them. 4 men standing in a small clearing, dressed in old military gear. They're big men, muscular, with long hair and thick beards. But there's something wrong with their faces in the moonlight. Their teeth seem too sharp. Their eyes reflect light like an animal's. The ranger was here last night, the first man continues. He knows something's not right. Malcolm Creedmoor, another voice says, and I freeze when I hear my name. Served with the 173rd Airborne in Vietnam. Lost his whole squad in '69. How do they know about me? My service record isn't public information. Maybe we should recruit him, the first man suggests. He understands war, understands survival. Or maybe we should eliminate the problem, the third voice growls. That's when one of them turns his head directly toward my hiding spot. His eyes catch the moonlight and shine like yellow lamps. He smiles, showing teeth that are definitely too sharp for any human mouth. Hello, Ranger Creedmoor, he says in a voice like gravel. Why don't you come out and join us? My hand goes to my pistol, but I know it's useless. These men, if they are men, are spread out in a perfect ambush formation. If I run, they'll catch me. If I fight, they'll kill me. I know you're there, the man continues. I can smell your fear. It's the same smell your squad had in the Somme jungle when the Viet Cong found them. That does it. Nobody talks about my dead friends. I step out from behind the tree with my gun drawn. Who are you? I demand. The leader laughs. He's a big man, maybe 6'4", with scars on his face and arms that look like they came from shrapnel. My name is David Kowalski, Sergeant, 1st Class, United States Army, 173rd Airborne Brigade. My heart stops. David Kowalski was in my unit. He was my squad leader. He died in the same ambush that killed everyone else. That's impossible, I whisper. David died in Vietnam. I saw his body. You saw a body, Kowalski corrects. Burned beyond recognition. Easy to make that mistake in the middle of a firefight. He takes a step closer, and in the moonlight, I can see the familiar scar on his chin from where he fell off his bike as a kid in Cleveland. It's really him. What happened to you? I ask. We survived, he says simply. All of us. But survival came with a price. As he talks, the other 3 men begin to change. Their faces stretch and elongate. Hair sprouts from their skin. Their hands become claws. Within seconds, they're not men anymore. They're wolves. Huge, black wolves with intelligent yellow eyes. Kowalski remains human, but I can see the change starting in him too. His teeth are growing sharper, his fingernails becoming claws. Chemical weapons, he explains, his voice becoming rougher. The Viet Cong hit us with some experimental stuff, killed most of the squad instantly. The rest of us, we changed. We became something new, something stronger. Werewolves, I breathe. He laughs, a sound that's half human, half growl. European folklore. But yeah, that's the general idea. We transform at will now. We're faster, stronger, better hunters than we ever were as humans. The three wolves circle around me, moving with perfect coordination. I keep my gun trained on Kowalski, but my hands are shaking. Why are you here? I ask. Territory, he says. This forest is ours now. We hunt here, we live here, and we don't like visitors. The hunters, trespassers, he growls. They came into our territory with weapons. They were a threat. They were just hunting deer. So are we, Kowalski says, and his smile shows teeth like razors. The difference is, we're better at it. One of the wolves moves behind me. I can feel its breath on my neck. You have a choice, Malcolm, Kowalski says. Join us, or join the hunters. I won't murder innocent people. Innocent? Kowalski's face is almost fully transformed now. You killed innocent people in Vietnam. We all did. That's what soldiers do. That was war. This is war too, he snarls. The war to survive in a world that doesn't want us. I make my decision. I dive to the left, rolling behind a fallen log as the wolves attack. My first shot catches one of them in the shoulder, spinning it around. It yelps like a dog but gets back up immediately, the wound already starting to heal. I run. For the next 3 days, they hunt me. I call in sick to work and barricade myself in my cabin. I've got enough supplies for a week and enough ammunition for a small war. My military training kicks in, and I start treating this like a combat situation. I set up tripwires around the cabin using fishing line and empty cans filled with rocks. I board up the windows and create firing positions. I even dig a foxhole in my backyard, just like we used to do in Vietnam. The first night, they test my defenses. I hear them moving around outside, circling the cabin like sharks. Sometimes they scratch at the walls with their claws. Sometimes they howl. Sometimes they speak in their human voices, trying to get me to come outside. Malcolm, Kowalski calls from the tree line. You can't hide forever. We know where ye work. We know where you shop. We know where you get your mail. I don't answer. I just sit in my living room with my rifle across my knees, waiting. On the second night, they kill my neighbor. Mrs. Henderson lives about half a mile down the road. She's 73 years old and makes the best apple pie in the county. I find what's left of her the next morning when I venture out to check my perimeter. They left her body where I would find it, arranged like a warning. There's a note pinned to her kitchen door, written in what looks like blood. This is what happens to people you care about. That evening, I try calling the state police, but the phone lines have been cut. My radio won't reach dispatch from inside the cabin. Too many mountains blocking the signal. I'm completely alone. On the third night, they attack in force. It starts around midnight with howling from all directions. Then they begin throwing rocks at the cabin, trying to break windows and make noise. They want me scared and confused. I stay calm and methodical, just like Sergeant Martinez taught us in basic training. Panic gets you killed, he used to say. Stay cool, assess the situation, make your move. The first wolf comes through the back door, which I left deliberately unlocked. It triggers my tripwire and a shotgun blast takes its head clean off. The body transforms back into human form. A young man, maybe 25, with military dog tags around his neck. The second wolf comes through the front window. I'm ready for it with my rifle, but the silver-plated bullets I had specially made just wound it. It retreats, howling in pain and fury. Silver bullets? Kowalski's voice calls from outside. Really, Malcolm? You're buying into the folklore now? But the silver is working. I can hear the wounded wolf whimpering like a hurt dog. Actually, I shout back, it's not bullets. It's something else entirely. That's when I reveal my real weapon. I've melted down my military cross and mixed the silver into a homemade napalm mixture. In Vietnam, we learned that sometimes you have to burn the enemy out of hiding. I light the mixture and throw it through the broken window. The forest outside erupts in silver flames that burn hotter and brighter than anything natural. The wolves scream, horrible sounds that are part human, part animal, and retreat into the darkness. But I know they'll be back, and next time, they'll be ready for my tricks. The fourth day, I make a terrible discovery. While cleaning up the damage to my cabin, I find military records scattered in my backyard. They're personnel files for the 173rd Airborne, my old unit. But these files are different from what I remember. According to these documents, the squad that died in the ambush wasn't killed by the Viet Cong. They were killed by their own government. The files describe a classified experiment called Project Lycanthrope. The Army was testing a biological weapon designed to create super soldiers, faster, stronger, more aggressive than normal humans. My squad was exposed to the weapon without their knowledge, then abandoned in the jungle when the experiment went wrong. Most of the squad died from the chemical exposure, but 5 men survived and transformed into something new, something dangerous. The Army declared them all killed in action and erased them from official records. David Kowalski and his pack aren't just werewolves. They're government experiments that went wrong, abandoned by the country they served, and now they want revenge. That night, they don't attack the cabin. Instead, they attack the town. I hear the screams around 3 a.m, echoing up from the valley where the small town of Marienville sits beside the Allegheny River. Emergency sirens wail in the distance. I can see orange light flickering between the trees, fires burning out of control. By dawn, 12 people are dead. The local sheriff, 3 deputies, a doctor, a teacher, and 6 otages, hers, all torn apart by what the surviving witnesses describe as a pack of giant wolves that moved like soldiers. The state police arrive in force, but they're out of their depth. They set up roadblocks and bring in tracking dogs, but how do you hunt something that can think like a human and move like a wild animal? I know I'm the only one who understands what we're fighting. And I know that Kowalski is going to keep killing innocent people until I face him. It's time to stop running and start hunting. I spend the day preparing for war. First, I drive to the County Historical Society and research everything I can about the old German settlers in this area. The librarian, Mrs. Kowalski, no relation to the sergeant, tells me about the folk stories her grandmother used to share. The old Germans, they had stories about Waldgeist, she explains, forest spirits that could take the shape of wolves or men. They said the spirits were the souls of warriors who died far from home, trapped between the world of the living and the dead. She shows me a hand-drawn map from 1847 that marks what the settlers called cursed ground, places in the forest where the Waldgeist were strongest. According to the map, one of those places is less than 2 miles from where the hunters were killed. Next, I visit the local church and convince Father Mackenzie to let me borrow their silver communion vessels. I explain that I need them for spiritual protection, which isn't really a lie. Finally, I stop at the gun shop and buy every silver bullet they have in stock, plus materials to make more. The owner, Jimmy Kowalski, apparently everyone in this county is related to everyone else, gives me a strange look. "You hunting something special?" he asks. "Something like that," I reply. As night falls, I prepare for the final battle. I load my rifle with silver bullets and strap extra ammunition to my belt. I melt down the communion vessels and make silver-tipped arrows for the bow I haven't used since I was a teenager. I even sharpen a silver knife that used to belong to my grandfat, her. Then I head into the forest, moving toward the cursed ground marked on the old map. I find them waiting for me in a clearing surrounded by standing stones that must be hundreds of years old. The stones are covered with carved symbols that look Native American, mixed with German runes. This place has been used for rituals by different peoples for centuries. Kowalski stands in human form at the center of the circle. The other 3 pack members are in wolf form, sitting like trained guard dogs. They're all watching me with those glowing yellow eyes. "You came," Kowalski says, sounding genuinely surprised. "You killed Mrs. Henderson," I reply. She never hurt anybody in her life. Collateral damage, he says with a shrug. War is hell, Malcolm. You know that better than most. This isn't war. This is murder. Is it? His face begins to change, becoming more wolf-like. We were soldiers once. We served our country faithfully. And what did we get for our service? They used us as test subjects. They turned us into monsters. They erased us from history. So you decided to become the monsters they made you into? We decided to survive, he snarls, fully transforming now, and to make them pay for what they did to us. He's not just a werewolf anymore. He's something bigger, more terrifying. His wolf form is the size of a small horse, with intelligence burning in his yellow eyes and human cunning in his tactics. Join us, Malcolm, he growls in a voice like grinding stone. You understand betrayal. You understand abandonment. Help us make them pay. For a moment, I'm tempted. My own government sent me to fight in a war that couldn't be won, then abandoned the veterans who came home broken. How many of my friends killed themselves because they couldn't get help? How many died on the streets because nobody cared about their nightmares? But then I remember Mrs. Henderson's apple pie and the way she always asked about my health. I remember the young teacher who died last night, who was just trying to help kids learn to read. No, I say, raising my rifle. Innocent people don't deserve to die for the government's sins. Kowalski laughs, a sound like breaking glass. Then you die with them. The battle is brutal and fast. The three wolves attack first, moving in perfect coordination like a military unit. I get one with a silver bullet through the heart. It drops immediately, transforming back into human form as it dies. The second wolf gets close enough to knock me down, but I manage to drive my silver knife into its throat. It thrashes and howls, then goes still. The third wolf learns from the other's mistakes and stays back, circling me while Kowalski approaches from the front. They're trying to divide my attention, make me choose which threat to face. That's when I use my last trick. I pull out a hand grenade, a souvenir from Vietnam that I never turned in. But this grenade has been modified. Instead of regular explosive, it's filled with silver fragments from the melted communion vessels. Remember fragmentation grenades, Sergeant? I ask, holding up the device. 3-second fuses, 15-meter kill radius. Kowalski's eyes widen. Even as a werewolf, he remembers his military training. I pull the pin and throw the grenade between them. We all dive for cover behind the stone circle, but the silver fragments still find their targets. The third wolf screams as dozens of silver shards pierce its hide. When the smoke clears, only Kowalski and I are left alive. We face each other in the center of the stone circle, both wounded, both exhausted. He's still in wolf form, but smaller now, weaker. Silver wounds don't heal like normal injuries. You could have lived forever, he pants, blood dripping from his muzzle. We could have been brothers again. We were never brothers, I reply, aiming my rifle at his heart. Brothers don't abandon each other. I pull the trigger. The silver bullet takes Kowalski in the chest, right through the heart. He transforms back into human form as he dies, looking like the young sergeant I once knew and respected. For a moment, his eyes are clear and human again. Tell them, he whispers. Tell them what they did to us. Then he's gone. I sit in that stone circle for a long time, surrounded by the bodies of men who were once soldiers like me. The sun comes up, and the forest starts to sound normal again. Birds singing, insects buzzing, the creek running over stones. When the state police finally find me, I tell them a simple story. I tracked the pack of wild dogs that had been killing people. There was a fight. I won. The official report lists it as an animal attack. The bodies are buried in unmarked graves. The classified files about Project Lycanthrope disappear back into whatever government vault they came from. But I keep copies. 3 weeks later, I retire from the Park Service and move to Philadelphia. I find a small apartment near the VA hospital and finally start seeing a therapist about my nightmares from Vietnam. Dr. Rebecca Martinez is a small woman with kind eyes who specializes in treating combat veterans. She doesn't laugh when I tell her about the wolves. though she suggests we might be dealing with symbolic representations of unresolved trauma. Sometimes, she explains, our minds create metaphors to help us process experiences that are too terrible to face directly. The important thing is that you survived, and you protected innocent people. I don't argue with her interpretation. The truth is too complicated, too dangerous. But I sleep better knowing that she understands the important part. Sometimes good people have to fight monsters. Even when those monsters used to be good people too, I keep in touch with the Allegheny National Forest through friends still working there. So far, no more unexplained animal attacks, no more Mysterio, us deaths. The forest is peaceful again, but sometimes, on nights when there's no moon, I hear howling in my dreams. And I wonder if there are other experiments out there, other abandoned soldiers transformed into something hungry and angry and lost. I keep my silver bullets in a drawer beside my bed just in case, because you never know when the monsters from your past might come looking for you, and when they do, you'd better be ready to fight. Even if those monsters used to be your friends,